Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the January 18th regularly scheduled session of the Planning Commission of the City of Annapolis. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Waldman.
Present.
Mr. Sakianudis.
Present.
Mr. Klein.
Present.
Mr. Riley.
Present.
Mr. Chair, we are not expecting Ms. Butler. We have 4 members present.
We have a quorum. We have an agenda tonight. There is one major issue upon the agenda tonight. We have some old business. I would suggest that we take care of this old business first, and so modify the agenda in that matter. That old business is 02333, which has to do with extensions of approvals from the Board of Appeals. And there are 2 reasons why I'm going to move to reconsider our work and our vote on that, which was at last meeting. Ms. Butler is not here. She was sort of the point person on drafting the findings and recommendation. And furthermore, there's some work to be done on the legislation, and it's gone to the Office of Law and the planning staff, and so that we will be able to hear it in a hopefully cleaned up version in the future. So under our rules, we have the option to reconsider at our next meeting under Section 12 of our rules. So I move to reconsider 02333. Do I hear a second?
I second that.
Do we have any discussion on that? All right. Do we have a vote on that? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And I will move also then to postpone to our next regularly scheduled meeting, once again in accordance with our rules, which would be February 1st. Do I hear a second on that motion?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All right. Our old business is now finished, and we can now move to a public hearing on, and let me just identify it by its formal denomination, SDP 2023-00054, which is a major site design for the city dock. And I would like to make some introductory remarks, just so everybody has a roadmap of where we're going tonight and how we're going to conduct things tonight. This is a major project, and there are many facets to it, and we want to be able to hear and discuss all of those facets. The application tonight does not include the Welcome Center, the Burtis House, or the Prince George's Park at the end of Prince George's Street. It does not include that. What it does include is all the rest of the park and the resiliency construction that's going to be proposed as a part of this major project. So in your comments tonight and in your thinking tonight, you need not, and please do not, bring up the issues of the Welcome Center, the Burtis House, or the Prince George's Street End Park. That will come at a later time when it's gelled and ready for consideration, and it will come before this commission just as what's coming before this commission tonight. So, edit your remarks accordingly. This is an informational session, as well as a final decision will be made on whether the project's to be approved or not, or if it's to be approved under and subject to any conditions. But it's informational for the commission, Not all of the commissioners have been on the commission for as long as this process has been under consideration. And it is informational for the public who are sitting in this room, and it is informational for the people who are watching through television. So listen up, think about what questions you have, and we'll have an opportunity to ask those questions and hopefully receive answers. At the conclusion, after the public hearing portion of this session, either tonight or if it's required, we'll go to a second session, because there's time and there's patience to hear everybody and everything. And at the conclusion, there'll be a final decision by the Planning Commission. It does not go to the council, it's a final decision by us. The order that we will follow tonight is as follows. There'll be a presentation, pardon me, by the team which has been designing this project over many years. It will begin with an initial summary from the staff members, perhaps, who are responsible for the project within the Department of Planning and Zoning, and who have prepared a staff report. It's an extensive report, it's exceedingly well-written, and some copies have been made available at the table near the doorway entrance. So if you'd like to see it and read it, please feel free to. There are not unlimited number of copies, so pass them amongst yourselves so that you can, as many people as want to read it, can. Following that initial summary by staff, the team will present the plan, and it will consist of, led off by Eileen Fogarty, who has shepherded this caravan for many, many, many months and many, many, many meetings. She'll be followed in whatever order she wants, but Scott Reichel, landscape architect, will present and probably be prepared to answer questions at the appropriate time. The engineer who's responsible for the resiliency, the extensive infrastructure work which is being proposed, will follow. Mr. Bryce Turner, who is the lead architect on the project, will have some remarks. And I understand that there are some remarks by some eminent people, among them Mr. Kurt Schmook, who I do not see, former mayor of the city of Annapolis and dean of various universities, colleges, and law schools, and one time and may still be resident of the Bay Ridge Peninsula. Joel Dunn from the Chesapeake Conservancy, and Mr. Chris Haley, who led the legacy portion of the city doc of this application. There will be questions by the commissioners and back and forth, and hopefully some of your questions will be answered throughout all of this. There'll be the final recommendation from the staff. And if during all of this presentation you have questions, I have laid some multicolored index cards out at the table near the door. Feel free to use those index cards, write down your questions, and pass them up to Ms. Burke, who is sitting at the table next to Mr. Smith. And she'll sort of collate them and get them up to me. And I will ask those questions for you. So you may need not go to the lectern, and you will get your questions answered, asked and hopefully answered. It's a process that we've used in different circumstances. It's a bit unusual, but I think that it might help us to proceed tonight. We will then open the formal public portion of this hearing. And as anybody who wishes to speak may, and please come to the lectern, identify yourself by name, and either by address or email, because we need to keep a record, and in case we need to contact you for whatever reasons, we can. So please, an address or an email, and I tell you, identify yourselves. I'd like to keep things moving, and I would like to keep things relevant, and I'd like to keep things articulate. So I'd like to put an informal 3-minute limit on your time, so as folks don't go on and on and on until the late evening hours. And if you are a member of an organization that has some points of view, I would suggest that you kind of pool your 3-minute allotments and maybe have 1 or 2 persons from your organization speak. And that way, I think that we can be a little more organized, a little more structured, and hopefully not repetitive. We're here to hear your points of view. We're here to hear your observations. We're here to hear your suggestions. Our job is to listen to the presentation, to learn for ourselves what the facts are, and to hear from the public, our fellow neighbors and citizens. And then in the final analysis, we will do what we think is right as citizen planners. So help us. Keep your remarks specific, non-repetitive, if I can repeat myself. And please don't be oratorical. What we need is specifics. What we need are real observations and real suggestions and real comments that can help shape this project as it moves along. After everybody has spoken, the public portion of the hearing will close. The commission then will enter into discussion and to deliberation and to a final decision. A set of findings and opinion will be written and will be presented at the next meeting after the public hearing concludes. Public document, hopefully it will represent the summation and of everything, of what we've heard, and will fulfill our obligations to make a decision that is in accord with the facts and with the law. So, with that, may we begin? Ms. Fogarty, well, not yet, Ms. Fogarty. Mr. Smith, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. It's been, 4 or 5 years since we've convened in person like this. I didn't need these back in the day. And actually, how fitting of such a significant project that I'd be here 30 plus years later with the lady I started with here this evening. So, for the record, Thomas Smith, Chief of Current Planning, City of Annapolis. This is a major site design plan review application, SDP-2023-00054, by Annapolis Mobility and Resiliency Partners in the City of Annapolis. It's a major site design plan review to redevelop the city dock area, including resiliency protection, flood protection, if it will, against sea level rise and flooding, but also to turn the space into a vibrant community park area, much as you articulated, Mr. Chairman. So I recall, must have been back in 2010, I believe it was Mayor Cohen first started with the advisory committee, the action committee, there's a legacy committee, ULI was involved, there's a design committee. This has been 14 plus years getting to this point, and we're getting close to the finish line. So thank you I know many of you were on those committees, so appreciate that participation in getting us all here. You should have received a staff report that had attachments, a memorandum from Mr. Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning, a letter from Ms. Durant, a Natural Resources Planner with the State of Maryland Critical Area Commission, and the various exhibits by the applicant. Take technically, I wouldn't really call this the first phase, but I have called this the first phase in my staff report. I think you could probably call it the first phase was the rebuilding of the Hillman Garage, which really added the additional spaces, which makes room for removing the spaces here that you'll see later tonight in the proposal from the city dock. So there's really no net loss of parking in the downtown area to create this. So this is phase one. I think, Mr. Chairman, you articulated rather clearly that this first phase, which includes resiliency in the form of elevation grade changes, flood barrier walls and protection, but also a programmed and passive people space for recreational use, fountains, pergolas, stage areas, promenade areas, which I know we're going to get into great detail about here this evening, just creating what has been, at least since post-war 50s, a parking lot into a wonderful people space that this town deserves. But the Welcome Center and Gateway Park at the end of Prince George Street is a later phase, not included tonight, as you articulated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm not going to belabor on and on, but to be specific, this is an application for a site design plan review. So the reason we're here tonight is to make sure this application meets the standards in section 2122080 of the City Code and chapter 2162 of the City Code, which this department has found the application complies with, but I'll give my concluding remarks at the end. I'll turn it over to Ms. Fogarty and her team.
Thank you very much, Chair, Tom, and the Commission. We're, needless to say, very excited to be here this evening. On behalf of Mayor Buckley, who is tonight presenting many elements of the resiliency aspect of the city dock to the National Mayors Conference in Washington, we are excited to finally, with our partners, bring this plan forward. The City Dock team and our partners are here to both present and answer your questions. Let's see if I can do this. When we look at our city dock, we realize this has been a very, very long time in the making. If you look at the evolution of city dock, what has been critical throughout history, some of these images go back to the late 1800s through the 40s and 50s. At critical times, there have been, in response to the economic and cultural changing needs, there have been significant changes to our city dock. At once, it was an import harbor. During World War II, we had on the other side of the creek shipbuilding. It's been a fishing harbor. And if you look at most recently, it has for many years been a parking lot to serve the needs of customers and tourism alike. Today, we are really confronted with the need to continue the tradition, and that is the tradition to transform City Dock. We have had many, many people in the community, the commission, our city council, our City Dock advisory group, all looking at the issue of what is the need, what is the best use right now for our city dock. And what you will see in the presentation from both Scott and from Derek is that we've heard a resounding request to immediately stop the flooding, to build a resilient downtown along with our partners at the Navy, to transform this parking lot into an active park to be enjoyed by everyone, to finally, in a fully embraced approach, celebrate our diverse history, and Chris Haley is here with us tonight to address that, and to unlock water access for all Annapolitans. The result has turned out to be a waterfront that is being viewed as a national model even as we speak tonight. It is, we've been saying this for 5 years now. We started in 2019, this effort. Mayor Schmoke had an effort that started, I believe, in 2011 and coming forward in 2013 with the same request. It is time for action now. These images are from the last couple of weeks. This past month, literally 2 weeks ago, the flooding elevation was over 5 feet. It was the third most significant flooding event in the city's history. So obviously, the need is urgent and the need is becoming more frequent in terms of what we are experiencing. Tonight, for you, for the commission, we are bringing forward for adoption what Tom correctly referred to as Phase 1 of the City Dock project, and that is the site plan, the resiliency, and then Bryce will also discuss a little bit on the broader context, how all of it plays together. On the site plan, you will see that it not only it meets but exceeds the comprehensive plan's desire for enhancing public space. It meets the site design standards in our code, as Tom has just expressed. This document implements the City Dock Consensus Plan from 2020, and it complies with critical areas. We've just received a letter from the Critical Area Commission. For resiliency, Derek tonight will talk about, Derek and Zoe Johnson from the Academy will talk about flood protection from Gate Zero to Compromise Street. When we look at what we have, I say, gone through in a positive way, how we've reached this point together. The commission, many of the people in the audience, and certainly the entire professional team at the city, and with our professional partners here from AMRP, it's been an extensive process, again, starting in 2019, adopting a consensus plan in 2020, and just the site plan alone, the dates up there are just for the site plan. The site plan came out last January 2023. The commission has had 3 meetings on it. The council has met on it. City Dock Action Committee, both the conceptual plan and then the more detailed site plan, which is before you this evening. I think most importantly, through all of this process, is the city, both the city staff and this professional team have been listening to everyone's comments. Just in the past year, we've had over 80 outreach meetings alone. We've had ward meetings throughout the city. We've had stakeholder groups such as Downtown Partnership, the Maritime organizations from both the county and the city, Historic Annapolis, Ward 1, the list goes on, and stakeholders. What everyone we have heard has said the same thing, that now is the time to meet the needs of all Annapolitans by transforming our city dock from a parking lot into, and I will let Scott now describe what it is being transformed into. There you go, Scott.
Thank you, Eileen. And good evening. It's nice to be here in person for change over the last couple of years and see all of you in person. As Eileen said, I won't belabor it, but what we heard from the CDAC Commission was, this was to be a place for all Annapolitans. We were to reflect the legacy of Annapolis, to be a world-class urban park, improve access to the water, increase the tree canopy for downtown, and protect downtown from flooding. And I think as I take you through this, you'll see that we've done all of these things with the current plan. From the Planning Commission in our various meetings, we heard that they wanted it to be more appealing to all generations, cross-generational, so it had to be kids on up to people my age. pedestrian focused. We wanted it to not, originally we were looking at cars entering the park area. We said we don't want any cars it's all to be pedestrian focused. You'll see that we've accomplished that. We've enhanced the north sides of Dock Street sidewalks. I'll show you in a diagram shortly. You asked us we've shown you view sheds. You asked us to look at more. We have those tonight. I think we have 16 that we'll share with you, and I think they're pretty compelling. And then consider the impacts of the periodic inundation and the periodic flooding on the trees that will remain in the flooded area. And all of the trees that we have are native and can take periodic inundation, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So this is a plan aerial view, but if you see all the numbers on the plan, we have been meeting with Chris Haley's group, the Legacy group, to incorporate historical and facts about City Dock and Annapolis, and try and get diversity, inclusion, and equity involved in all of these areas. And all of these numbers indicate opportunities for us to introduce that. So it'll really begin at Donner Park and go all the way over to Gate Zero. We also looked at programming the park on a daily basis, and it's a little hard to see, but the little dots are people. And like at the far right, we've got waterfront yoga, which we could see happening at 7:30 in the morning, right out there at Susan Campbell Park. We assume people will picnic on the open lawn. We've got an interactive fountain that we imagine children will be in all day long, all summer long. At the far left is sort of our game activity area, and that's where we'd have like tabletop tennis, cornhole, things like that. We see that as just being activated all the time. We've got tents along Dock Street, like little booths. We see that as potentially pop-up vendors, or even the farmer's market could go there. So we really see this. This is sort of an indication of how the park is used on a daily basis. We've also, been speaking with organizers of larger events, particularly the boat show, and have designed the park so that it still accommodates tents and things like that. The Singer-Songwriter Festival. Also, we've got, you can see we're showing booths all along Dock Street, all along the promenade on Ego Alley. There's a large stage at in the middle that can play to Susan Campbell Park as well as back to the lawn. We have the opportunity to set up a temporary stage at the end of Dock Street, which is where the Singer-Songwriter Festival has their stage. And that whole event space is cleared out. There's all the furniture, trees, and whatnot in that space to the left are all movable, and that becomes an event space. So you have audience and chairs, and so we really feel like it's a multifunctional. It has to be flexible, and we've designed that into the park. This is where I was talking about the improvements on Dock Street. If you see the magenta line there, that is the current curb line. We're extending it out. We're narrowing the passageway there for cars, extending the walkway out, and increasing the number of trees along Dock Street, so making it a more pleasant streetscape. In the interactive fountain, we're in the middle of concepts right now, designing what will be incorporated in the fountain, but these are just some of the effects that it's meant for kids to be in it. And all of these are effects that we might see in the ultimate design. The low arches that kids can crawl under and through, small falls that would be maybe 12 to 18 inches that kids can actually sit upon, fan jets that sort of squirt out at different ways. They're all basically gentle waterworks, and it can be a pretty dynamic fountain, particularly at night as well. And then we'll get into the view sheds. All of the pink arrows here are views that we've taken, and I'm going to take you through them, and we'll begin at Market Street, which is the letter A, and go clockwise up to the Maritime Welcome Center, back down Susan Campbell Park, and all the way to Donner Park, and to Main Street is where we'll end. And so we have images of each of those where we've taken a photograph at that spot and then done a rendering of what you would see once the park is developed. So here we are, my back's to the market. We're looking across the street, Randall Street, to Ego Alley and the Alex Haley statue there. And so this is the planter we've designed. There'll be a seat wall on the other side of this. It's basically a way that we've created a walkway there, and then you can see the promenade of trees going down Ego Alley all the way out to Susan Campbell Park. This is Dock Street looking southeast, so I believe we're about at the ice cream shop here, and you're basically looking at, you see cars and more cars. And what we see now is Dock Street going through. You see those bollards there. That's where it becomes all pedestrian. And then the trees filtering the views across Ego Alley. This is looking Dock Street southeast, so we're looking down Dock Street. And you've got the Harbor Master building on your right. That's no longer there. This becomes a pedestrian street or a Woonurf. It's a curbless section. So it really is meant to be all pedestrian. Obviously, the bollards can drop for emergency access and loading and unloading for, when we have events there. But it's really meant to be a pedestrian space. We step up to that activity area. You can see the trees and round planters there, and then the improved streetscape going down Dock Street. Now we're further down Dock Street towards the end. And this is the view. So you still have that straight view over to Eastport. We've got trees on both sides, creating a nice streetscape. We've raised the level of this street to be equal to the level of the park. So we're up about 4 feet, I believe, from where it currently sits. This is looking across the water back to Susan Campbell Park. And you see that promenade again. You see Susan Campbell's become a much greener space, and then the alley of trees going down Dock Street. Again, looking across to Susan Campbell. Unfortunately, the boat's in the way, but through the magic of rendering, we remove the boat, and you can see Susan Campbell Park, and we've got the wider dock there that will accommodate offloading of the tour boats, and then a beautiful green space, open space with trees flanking on either side. This is the current condition looking at we're in Susan Campbell Park looking southeast. And then this will be the view back to that pergola that we were talking about. That's an opportunity for, on a daily basis, it's just tables and chairs in a shaded situation. But on event days, that can become a bandstand or performing, and can perform either way. So it can perform back towards Eastport or back towards downtown. This is the current view looking out, and you can see the trees actually obscure this view. We've really opened this one up looking southeast. This is the view now. You have a much more panoramic view at Susan Campbell Park because the trees have been moved to either side. This is Dock Street Park. So we're in the middle of what will now be the park. We're in the middle of the parking lot. This is the view that we're looking at northwest. And this is the view across the fountain. And you see the pergola just beyond that. And the fountain is recessed, so the fountain gets completely covered in events. There'll be a platform that sits over the fountain, so this space all becomes usable for events such as the boat show and singer-songwriter festival. This is looking down the promenade. Ego Alley's to my right. And the promenade is raised. The dock stays at the same level, but you can see the park is off to the left there and the alley of trees. And then it creates a very nice seat wall along that whole promenade facing Ego Alley. We're further down the promenade now, still looking southeast. And you'll see here, you note that the bulkhead is at elevation 5. The new promenade will be raised to that same elevation. So we've raised the elevation. The promenade now extends over the cars. The parking lot is now below that level by about 2.5 feet. And we've got the trees set back. And the resiliency wall is actually behind the trees, so that will rise up in floods, and which Derek will talk about in more detail. And here we are looking at we're back at the dinghy dock, looking up the promenade, and this is where you'll see the transition in the elevation. So here, that is a ADA access or handicap access. So that starts down low, goes up to that level 5, meets the bulkhead. So this is basically a wide ramp there. You see that gray line going through on the lower left. That's actually the flood. Those will rise up straight and become the flood walls, protection for the parking areas. Now we're in Donner Park, looking north back to the market house. And dinghy dock gets raised slightly, its current elevation, and then we've got the planter behind that to separate that from the traffic. This is looking at Donner Park, so my back is sort of to the dinghy dock looking down Ego Alley with Donner Park, and you'll see that this is currently a parking lot, becomes a really nice promenade with, we've got covered swings to the right, and then a green space beyond that going out to Compromise Street. And then now we're across the street looking back at Donner Park, and you can see basically, it's a brick wall in front of a parking lot, it'll be transformed to we'll maintain the wall, but then there'll be a green park space behind that with trees, and you can see that the swings that'll face out, you'll be able to sit there on swings and look out into Ego Alley. And then finally, this is at the base of Main Street. And I just point out that the masts that you see in the center of the picture beyond, they're still very visible when we put in the Donner Park landscape. They're still there. You can still see out to that area. So that's that view. Now, we also want to talk about the enhanced soil volume under the paving. This is, we're accomplishing two things, stormwater management for impervious areas, but it also, more importantly, from a landscape architect's point of view, it gives these trees a chance. And one of my colleagues, who's actually an Annapolitan, Jim Urban, has been a long champion of this, is connecting the tree pits beneath the paving, so we have expanded tree pits. It allows the tree roots to continue to grow and gives them much more of a natural area to expand their root systems, and you get very successful tree longevity in urban situations. And this is just color coded. These are the trees that all the trees that we're using. They're all native. And as I said, you can see the black dashed line. That is the flood wall. And so some of these trees will be in the flooding situation, but As we know, it's only for several hours generally, and so they can take periodic inundation. These are native trees that like a swamp white oak, for example, that will, thus the name, right, can take wet feet and brackish water. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Derek, who's going to walk.
Just run the slides.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott. I think those images comparing existing and proposed, conditions are, very compelling to the change. Oops, there we go. So I'm Derek Piper with WSP, and I'm the project manager for the engineering design team. So we know that protecting and enhancing City Dock is imperative for advancing the maritime, cultural, and legacy history of the city. And this project essentially involves redeveloping an existing waterfront parking lot into a world-class public park. As Eileen mentioned, the project is consistent with the city comprehensive plan, which is organized around 3 main ideas: preserve and enhance community character, maintain a vibrant economy, and promote a green Annapolis. The proposed design maximizes public access to the waterfront, enhances the City Dock open space for multiple different public uses, and balances the needs and interests of residents, businesses, and events. The project includes implementation of a flood barrier system to reduce impacts from flood events, just like the recent flooding event that impacted City Dock here a couple weeks ago. And I'll talk more about the flood barrier system in a minute. The proposed design complies with city design standards for major projects, including a litany of very specific issues. For example, proposed park layout and design is consistent, compatible, and in harmony with the surrounding neighborhood. The design involves minimal modification to natural features, and the design provides stormwater quality management for 75% of redeveloped impervious area using a combination of microbial retention, underground filtering, and tree pit BMPs that Scott previously presented. The design is consistent with the City Dock Master Plan, formerly known as the City Dock Consensus Plan, and Bryce will talk a little about this in a few minutes. Finally, the proposed design maximizes adverse effects to resources within the Critical Area Overlay District, and the State Critical Area Commission concurs that the project is consistent with the city's Critical Area Program. Next slide, Scott. This image presents the, is it a delay? There we go. This image presents the alignment of the proposed flood barrier system. A little bit hard to see, but the system will provide tidal flood protection to elevation 8, providing adequate protection for the predicted intermediate or high 2050 sea level with a 100-year storm, 100-year return period wind speed, and 100-year return period wave height. The project involves implementation of a barrier system from Donner Park around and along Spa Creek and connecting to the U.S. Naval Academy wall. A future site plan submittal will be provided for the area of the proposed Maritime Welcome Center, as the chairman mentioned, and the flood barrier system connection to a new U.S. Naval Academy flood barrier wall. And Zoe's going to talk about that here in a minute too. Finally, the city is in discussions with Compromise Street property owners to complete the overall tidal flood protection system for the entire City Dock area. So the proposed barrier system involves multiple types. The slide presents solid walls to elevation 8 in yellow, again, a little bit difficult to see, along with either flip-up, vertical rising, or manual barrier systems in the noted colors. The design team is working collaboratively with the city to determine the specific path forward, considering cost, maintenance, and other constraints. We are proposing minimal use of manual barrier systems that city maintenance forces would need to install in advance of flood events, just through the time and labor constraints there, and getting things in place in a timely manner. The project includes a stormwater pump station so that rainfall that occurs concurrent with flood events can be removed. That rainfall can be removed from the area that inside of the barriers. No one will trap water behind the barriers. Finally, this slide presents fire access lanes along the promenade for exclusive use by city emergency vehicles, and along Dock Street, and a one-way parking lot circulation and a bus drop-off lane, in the remaining parking area along Dock Street. Next slide. So this, changing gears a little bit, this project also includes significant improvements to public infrastructure at City Dock. This includes new water and sewer lines to current city design standards, new electrical infrastructure and system improvements. And as you can imagine, the systems that are at City Dock now have been added on for many years, and this project is taking that opportunity to consolidate that and make a much more efficient system and much more operable for the various events and various uses of City Dock. A new drainage collection system, and I mentioned the stormwater pump station, new site lighting, especially lighting to city standards, and also a new marine blackwater pump station to provide the harbor master a needed service for marine vessels. So it concludes my remarks, and Zoe is here representing the U.S. Naval Academy. Zoe?
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Planning Commission. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here tonight representing Christopher Schwartz, Commanding Officer and U.S. Navy Captain of Naval Support Activity Annapolis. He's under the weather tonight, so I'm here and he sends his regards. But we have had the pleasure since 2019 of partnering with the city on the City Dock Resilience Plan. I actually served as the co-chair for the City Dock Action Committee's Consensus Plan Resilience Work Group. We have a partnership in that I participate and coordinate with the city on and provide my expertise and the Naval Academy's expertise and our faculty's expertise on sea level rise and climate change planning, as well as we've invited the city to be formal partners of the Naval Academy's Sea Level Rise Advisory Council. We both have been developing plans simultaneously to protect against shared vulnerabilities from rising sea level, climate change, and stormwater and impending coastal storms. As evidenced last week, we both share the same vulnerabilities, and we share, obviously, a shared property boundary at the heart of City Dock along Prince George Street, as well as King George Street. So like the city, we have developed a comprehensive resilience plan we published in 2022. It shares a number of the same planning principles and resiliency design principles that you're going to see tonight that are presented as part of this flood control plan for the city. We rely, and the cities relies on, defense in depth approach, not relying on one, flood protection measure, but multiple flood protection measures. They both rely and portray or include components of phased elevation increases that can be, increased over time with rising sea levels. They both include components of allowing in some places to add passive increases in pop-up barriers so you can maintain public access in the city side and on the Naval Academy side and at the heart of City Dock, commercial and water access to the boating community. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Naval Academy's plan, but really I'm here to talk about the partnership and our interest in ensuring the success of this project. As you know, water knows no boundaries. It does not follow property lines. It goes where it wants to go. And so knowing that and knowing the vulnerability and the shared risk we have worked so closely over the last few years with the city in developing the plan, but also seeing it into the design phase and ultimately hopefully into execution. I know it's not before you tonight, but the Prince George Street flood wall component that is actually under design right now by the U.S. Naval Academy, we are farther ahead in terms of design of our flood wall. We have had a number of meetings already with the city. We have another with the city design firm scheduled for next week. We are working very closely to ensure our flood wall and our flood protection measures that ultimately will run down Prince George Street and terminate at what we call Gate 0 will be able to be tied and sequenced in, so we have a seamless protection component at that terminus. So we are proud of our relationship we have with the city on this project, and we've been honored, to be able to participate thus far. I would just say that the Naval Academy's plan, when we can see it out to execution, we think that the city is fortunate in that they have a very small area. We have 19,000 linear feet of seawall. Our plan lays out a phased and sequenced approach to addressing these challenges with projects that are beginning now with a Farragut seawall and need to be executed out to the year 2045. So we have much more to come, but we are optimistic and we believe that we're prepared and positioned to continue supporting the city where we can, so that we can ensure that the entrance to the Naval Academy and our mission of access, and particularly access at our Berry Gate, at Gate 0 and at Gate 1 can be maintained and protected against flooding. Thank you.
Commissioners, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Smith, I'm Bryce Turner, BCT Design Group. We've been involved in the master plan for the project for these past 5 years, I guess. Tom was saying that he didn't need glasses when he began this maybe, 19 years ago? I did have reading glasses 5 years ago when I started, but these are now prescription glasses, I can tell you. So it's been a while. But in all seriousness, this is a super important project, and I think we all know that, and you've heard a lot about that already tonight. This team has put together a beautiful, a sensitive, a vibrant solution to resiliency here at City Dock and at the front door of Annapolis in a way that creates an incredible park that will really be something I think all Annapolitans will be very proud of. And it's not only a plan that this team put together by any means. As Tom said, this really began many, many years ago. We're building upon the foundation of plans that have been in existence and that are available out there for all of us to look at. And indeed, even when the ULI folks came to town 5 years ago, they began with what had already been discussed, developed, and we like to think that this is a simple solution that builds upon that. As Scott said, we're not allowing cars within the park. I think that's been fantastic. It's a pedestrian space. It's for waterfront access. And I think that's incredibly important. We'll be able to celebrate our heritage here. And it's going to be an experiential living room space that will be really a world-class and a role model, I think, for a lot of waterfront communities in historic cities. So I think that's incredibly important. And I don't want to take too much time, and I just wanted to stress the urgency, though, of this. And it's really important that we get this approved and we start construction this year before another boat show. And so we appreciate you hearing us tonight. We have met on this, of course, many times in the past, and we got through Hillman, got it built in order to be able to accommodate City Park here in the green space. So it's incredibly important, as you heard Derek and Scott speak to. We meet the design standards that we need to meet in the protocols of Annapolis for a large project like this. That's incredibly important, but it also addresses sustainability, by removing that asphalt and the runoff, into our waterways, which is so critical, and providing resiliency from rising seas. So I encourage you to move quickly with this, and I look forward to hearing any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bryce, and I think Chris is going to join us very briefly.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. I just think sometimes when we get into projects such as this, and when we get in projects such as this within the city, we sometimes, believe it or not, underestimate the effect and the outreach of what we're trying to do here. Now, for ourselves, we know it's financially exuberant and a large amount of money, and a large of us have put our time and our energy and our passion into this. But I dare say to you, it's an international effort that we are undertaking right now. And if by no other means I was reminded of this because of last Tuesday we had that horrible storm. And the storm that was raining and raining and raining and raining, and there was water and there was fear and there was liberal leave and there was going home so many hours earlier than you would want to. And even though it's nice to get off work early, you're still a little bit nervous about, will I make it home safely? Now, I was reminded on a personal level that it is international, it is national renown, because what was even mentioned to me in passing was that your uncle is the weather gauge for Annapolis, Maryland. Because in so many sites, in so many web pictures or memes, there's my Uncle Alex. And it's dependent on where that water is how bad the flooding is. There was one time when he had a vest on, an orange vest on, and I never knew him to be someone other than the Coast Guard that he would have worn that color. It wasn't good for him. But that reminded me that whatever we do and however we approach this monumental reimagining of City Dock, it's going to get international attention whenever it rains. And so whatever we talk about resiliency and all that we're trying to do right now to help us deal with Mother Nature, all that we create there will go beyond whatever is the specifics of whether we have flooding or not. It will be the look beyond my uncle's head to what else do we have established in this City Dock area. This City Dock area, which is more than just Market House, Middleton's, O'Brien's. It's what we create that's going to be specific for an international audience of viewers. And so because of that, I've been so proud to lead the legacy part of this effort, because that is about bringing into focus that this isn't just about the citizens of Annapolis. It's about the citizens of Annapolis and their descendants and their ancestors and their cousins and their teachers and their communities and all people who will only come here maybe once, maybe twice for a visit, or they'll only see us referred to in documentaries, or they'll see us because it rained like cats and dogs and they saw my uncle's head and then they looked and said, oh my God, what's that at the pergola? What does that symbolism mean? Maybe it's a symbol that reaches out to the Greek immigrants who came here, or to the African Americans who sailed here involuntarily, as Kunta Kinte did. Maybe it'll mean to those persons who came here and started working at the dock on the many different vagaries of the different communities who started here on their lives, and still descendants are here today. So whatever we're putting together here, I just want to remind us that it's not just about those of us who are going through our lifetimes right now, but it's representing and respecting and remembering those who preceded us and putting a foundation in place, a historic foundation in place for those who will come after us, who will remember the before, who remember the after, and who will remember that I only looked at Annapolis because there was a statue of Alex Haley that used to have water over his head, and now there's so much more to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? I'll lead off. You ready? I'll lead off. Mr. Reichel, how many trees and pots are there? About. Can you give me an example?
Probably 15.
Okay. What's your thinking and planning on for those pots? How big? What kind of trees? Movable? What kind of life are they going to have? What experience do you have, or do you know of others who've had with those kinds of movable trees?
Yeah, so the planters are quite large. They're, they can range, at the smallest are 6 feet in diameter, and they can go up to 8 and 10. I think we're showing 8, between 6 and 8. I can't remember what we've got yet, but they are designed for a forklift to be able to get under them and lift them. So they actually have a recessed edge that allows for that. Obviously, they're not going to be shade trees in there. We're probably talking more, red bud size, crabapple size, that small cherries, things like that. We've seen this a lot. They do this a lot in Europe, particularly, and they, will have self-watering irrigation systems within them. so that they won't dry out quickly. It's a reservoir system at the base of it, so that we don't have to have piped irrigation to each one of them. And you just pick them up and move them to the side. So I think it's a great way to do it. I think the trees that in that size, we've used these in Bethesda in a shopping center, outdoor shopping center like this, and they don't actually move theirs, but it's the same planter, and they're doing fine. And actually, those we have elms in them, so they're doing quite well, surprisingly.
They'll take some maintenance, and at least for irrigation.
Well, like I said, the irrigation is going to be an integral system in the pot itself. So it'll be there's a standpipe. You'll have to fill that reservoir at the base of it, and then through capillary action, the water is taken up through the soil, so it keeps it evenly moist.
But somebody's going to have to do that occasionally.
Yeah, definitely.
And I might add, for the commission's benefit, we have met several times with the Parks Department and talked about what will be needed, and they've given us their thoughts and comments so that we will incorporate them.
Okay, so that's all part of an operating budget that takes place in the future. What kind of grass are you thinking of?
We'll probably use, I mean, technically it's a chewing red fescue probably, which is a more drought tolerant grass than, say, a Kentucky bluegrass. And also one that's designed, fortunately, University of Maryland is one of the best turf schools in the country, on the East Coast anyway. And they have athletic turfs that they've designed in the chewing red fescue realm. And so it's a cultivar that'll take heavy traffic. And that's what, and even the substrate that we'll design, as they did at the mall in Washington, is a quick draining one, so that you don't have ponding. The water goes quickly through. So it's sandy for the first several inches. So we're thinking about all that. And,
That'll take irrigation as well?
Yes, it's irrigated.
Have you considered zoysias?
We have. Zoysia turns brown, would be tan right now, and it does take a lot of traffic, but zoysia won't, when we come in and do a show over this, it's going to be pretty rough on any type of grass, and then you're going to be looking at, I personally think you would want it to be green year-round. And with irrigation, you can keep a cool season grass green. You can't do anything to keep zoysia from turning brown. It turns with the weather. We've considered it, but if you've seen golf courses out in the West where they use zoysia and a cool season grass, it's bizarre to me to see this bright tan and bright green right next to one another. So I personally, we really would like to see it be a cool season grass and be green year-round.
Does that take more maintenance, the cool season grasses?
I don't think so. I mean, zoysia doesn't grow as fast when it's growing. It doesn't grow as fast, so it doesn't require mowing as often. But these chewing red fescues are designed to not be mowed quite so short. They're meant to be leave them a bit longer, so you don't have as much maintenance. But we've reduced the size of the lawn. The lawn used to be twice the size, and that was part of what we heard, was that we didn't want a soccer field here at the dock. And so I think the amount of area that we have it's minimal in maintenance difference between that and zoysia.
How are the tents and walkways for the boat shows going to affect whatever you plant there?
I think we've been going back and forth about this and trying to understand. I've talked to turf experts, and the only way, if we're covering this for 2 to 3 weeks, solid cover, if we don't give it air, So if we don't raise the platforms up, the light is not the issue, it's really the air. And I think we're looking at it as an annual maintenance budget item that will replace the sod here, which is even more of a good reason why we have a smaller area that we'd have to replace.
What are the stormwater percentages as it stands now, and what it'll look like afterwards? Maybe Derek, the engineer, can answer this, whoever's better.
What are you asking for?
Well, I mean, is there any detrimental or beneficial effect on stormwater compared with what we have now with what is proposed?
Yeah, we have a significantly less, paved areas. Percentage-wise, I mean, you can sort of look at that as probably at least, 25 or 30% less paved areas, so that area does not run off and carry all the oil drippings from vehicles or whatever it is and traffic. But that stormwater gets filtered through bioretention facilities, microbioretention, tree root boxes and different things like that. So a large percentage of that, I think 75% of that, is filtered, directed into all those filtration systems and gets filtered before it gets releases. The stuff that hits the parking lot like it does today, then most of that is not going through filtration systems. That's continuing to run off, which is a very small percent.
So I understand in green areas, stormwater filters down through grass and sand and the substrata that you're going to be putting in. But what about in the paved areas? What happens with?
Yeah, a lot of the sidewalk areas, especially inside the park, and the stage, pergola area and stage area, that will all be directed towards filtration systems. So it's really only the remaining parking area that's not directly being filtered, and maybe even some of that gets filtered because we do have some tree boxes in that adjacent sidewalk. So depending on the grades, we have maybe portions of that, but the majority of that existing, the remaining parking is probably unfiltered.
Okay.
It's a significant reduction.
If I understood you correctly, some goes into the tree pits, but then others are going into small stormwater facilities.
Storm inlets, like they do today, and runs into Spa
What are they
Creek.
called? What'd you call them?
Just storm inlets. It eventually just drains into Spa Creek. That's the way it works today.
Okay.
There is some filtration systems out there now from previous, but it's probably not really functional since it's been a long time since they've been constructed.
It was mentioned that on the Compromise Street side, and I don't know who can answer this, that you're in discussions. And if I could take from what Ms. Johnson said, that it's important that the city cooperate with the academy, it's important that the city cooperate with the private property owners on the other side. What's the status of those discussions?
I can answer some of that, Derek, and then turn it back over to you. We have, the discussions are being led by Burr Vogel, the Director of Public Works. We have had numerous meetings with property owners. A couple of the property owners are very actively working with the city, and others we have approached and are, waiting, for their direction. But we have been actively, Public Works Director has been actively meeting, and I've been in many of those meetings as well.
So what does that mean specifically? Let's take Fleet Reserve. Start with Fleet.
Well, I'm not in a position to say what the negotiations are, but I can say the fleet has been very active in their participation with the city.
What would happen if, say, the hotel and the marina decide not to engage?
So, I mean, these projects like this are, often phased, and in fact, first time I sort of heard this piece from the Naval Academy, they're going to be working on projects that will occur over, 15 years or something. So it's not, unheard of that when the completion isn't normally done in a 2-year period. So this project represents, what is directly, I would say, directly under the city's control. The city owns City Dock and around the Donner Park. This is the first, the first phase of this resiliency project to protect this area from flooding. And there will need to be future phases. But and that's what, Eileen mentioned, that the city is in discussions. This team is not privy to the details of those discussions and not aware of the, exact details of, pieces and parts. But I will say that if this area does get, we get our plan to move forward and we spend a couple years here in construction, then this area will be corrected and it'll have the resiliency that we need going forward. And the flooding then can be a much smaller area that can probably much more easily be addressed through, temporary measures, at least for the lower storm events. So it would make the problem a lot smaller. And through time, as more projects get completed, then that becomes a smaller and smaller problem. So again, I think it's the normal progression of these types of complex projects that involve both public and private, facilities and properties that need to be addressed.
So you say it'll become a smaller problem, but still a problem?
Until it's all corrected, yes, sir.
And what's the risk to the city in the event that there's some pretty major flooding like the storm we just recently had, in terms of having all of this new infrastructure, but it's sort of open at that end? I mean, is there a plan to sort of deal with that on a temporary basis so that we don't sort of have this backdoor flooding that people talk about?
If I could just add, there is an opportunity to go across Compromise Street in a flood event in order to get to higher ground in an emergency for flooding. That doesn't help those that are on the water side, obviously, but it would be incentive to get something done. But because the land is higher to the south, you could actually go across Compromise Street in an emergency. So.
Is there a problem on the east side of the hotel at the marina? If it floods there, it's all piers and then a small amount of land there at between the hotel and the yacht club. What's there? What if they don't engage, for instance, what happens to Compromise Street? Does it all rush on?
I think that's...
It ends up, it's all low there, of course, in the parking lot. So Compromise Street's a little higher, and then, of course, you get to the residential on the other side of Compromise Street that's higher. And that is going to form a barrier at some point, but a lot of that towards the bridge.
Say you have full cooperation from everybody. What's the plan? What does it look like? Is it the same elevation as the other side?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the goal.
The
To get everything up to elevation 8.
Cooperation from everybody, it would look like the other side that you go out.
Right,
From what you should.
right.
And how about the Naval Academies? You have the jump on this. You've been working on this. You have clearly, you're going to be moving more quickly, I guess, than the city has been. It sounds like there's good coordination between you, but just the laws of physics aren't in our favor. Because this is a great point, because I actually have friends who live on the other side of Compromise Street in the old recreation center. And if we build up a seawall, he's swimming in his living room immediately thereafter if Fleet Reserve and the yacht basin and the hotel and the yacht club themselves, if they don't, I hate to say it, but play ball. It sounds like it's not necessarily in the purview of, it sounds like they're going to be highly incentivized to join the party. And I think that's fine. I think this is a critical need for the city. But on the other side, you have the Naval Academy, who already seem to be moving on this concurrently, but even before or separate from. I'm just wondering if there's a coordination of a timeline of, if, let's say we approve this for what's in the current plan, is there a plan to align that like flipping the light switch on, like we're all on the same page? Because if your wall goes up first, then just the laws of displacement could be bad timing for some people.
It's highly likely that the city's wall will go up first. Our wall is under design already, so we are farther ahead on the design. But we have not secured, we do not have the funds in hand yet for construction. So we're actively competing the flood once we have the design, and we're in the process of competing the flood wall for construction dollars. So we cannot commit to a timeline for the actual construction at this point, but it is one of our highest priorities and we're actively competing it. I don't know if that helps. So the Naval Academy actually sits, its elevation is slightly higher than the Naval Academy, than the city side. So in the storm last week, there was probably like 3.5 feet of water on Prince George Street. Did not enter the Naval Academy over the knee wall there as you approach the, gate 0. So we sit slightly higher, but until the Naval Academy builds its flood wall along Prince George Street and connects to the city's flood wall at Gate 0,
Right.
any water that would come over the Naval Academy in an extreme flood, say Hurricane Isabel type flood that did not occur last week, a storm of 7 foot, the water would come into the city, through the Naval Academy, through, behind Halsey Fieldhouse over that knee wall until we erect our flood barrier. So the flood barrier really is important because it provides sort of belts and suspenders. It will protect the Naval Academy from flooding on the city side, and it will prevent the city from any flood that would come over through the Naval Academy, through the Severn River. And in that circumstance, it would only be an extreme tropical storm, something of the magnitude of Hurricane Isabel. But we have to work very closely in terms of designing the connection point, designing the heights, but also the sequencing of the erection of the walls. Unfortunately, federal construction dollars for DoD facilities we compete projects year by year, and the city is using different funding sources. So we're working as hard as we can to ensure and prioritize and make sure these projects are designed so they can be compatible, and to the best we can sequence the construction.
So you just have to align Congress's budget with ours. Sounds no problem.
No problem.
I would like to add, as the engineer, and I'm not involved in policy, city policies where, we have a very concise project here, but the city is taking a very bold step here in correcting the situation, providing these resiliency, efforts in a flood barrier system here for City Dock and, whole way from Gate 0 to Donner Park. So if you're the property owner, you'd say, well, why should I do anything if it's going to flood City Dock and come around to my property or going to flood Donner Park? So, they don't really want to do anything. But to me, and I'm, just the engineer, I think it would give them a strong impetus to work collaboratively with the city and solve the problems and provide the flood protection along the entire length of compromised street as needed to protect that neighborhood and protect their properties too long term. So this is the first bold step and should be. There are other, and I think we're not sugarcoating that. There are other steps and there are other things that need to be done, but it's a very large step and makes the problem a lot, the series of problems are a lot smaller. If there is, stopping flood controls, stopping flooding waters of various heights, you could do something with sandbagging. And yes, the people that are inside that are still flooded, but you can still prevent some of that flooding from going into other areas. So hope that helps.
Back to Ms. Johnson, what's your vision for public access through Gate 0, assuming you build a seawall all the way, or flood wall all the way down that seawall towards the point? Do you have any visions for public access?
Not there. We have no plans for changing the current public access at Gate 0.
Which is none through
That's
Gate
correct.
0.
Okay. So, our prime visitor access entry point is at the Barry Gate and through the Visitor Access Center due to manning and security needs. Our flood wall terminates at Gate 0. And the vision and our resilience plan, it will then connect to an earthen berm an earthen berm system. The flood wall will connect to an earthen berm system that will wrap around the visitor center parking lot and continue around to the riprap on Turner Joy, and ultimately to the Farragut seawall. We are protecting to 9.7 feet, but we have a 100-year, 2,100-year planning vision. So at Gate Zero, it is important that the city's flood wall tie in with our flood wall on Prince George Street, because there will be no flood protection until we put in our earthen berm system to prevent water from coming into the city over and through the Naval Academy.
And
There's it's not in the design yet because it's still being worked out in that corner, exactly how the city's flood protection would basically seal off. One of the design concepts, was going to be on the elevated courtyard at the Prince George Street Pocket Park. That's not before us tonight, or not before you tonight, but that would be where the flood protection would be at Gate Zero to tie in with the Naval Academy's flood wall. So in front of that is where there's still vulnerability at the Gate Zero.
And Alderwoman Tierney asked that I augment Zoe's comments that the city, the mayor and Public Works are looking at transition applications that they observed in the Netherlands, inflatable barriers and portable flood, basically accordion walls for any temporary gaps.
Newman Street. Mr. Haley.
Sir.
What sorts of legacy installations are being envisioned?
There is such an assortment of the type of big possibilities. I think one of the things that I feel like is most...
Can you give him a microphone, will you?
I think there's very many. I think one of the ones that I feel like is the most inventive and could be the most engaging for our visitors, both senior and junior, would be the possibilities of stanchions or elements which would have QR codes, where people could use their cell phones, and they could, just like we do with the parking lot, they could put their camera onto the QR code and it would connect them to a narration of a portion of the history that this part of the city dock represents, whether that is some sculpture or if it's an actual statuary, or if it's a plaque, or if it's a quote, whatever it might be. I think that element, in addition to whatever static piece of visual that is put in place, can make it more live and vibrant to individuals. Because when you hear a voice, that helps encourage you to imagine whatever that voice or whatever that narrator is speaking about. Because if as wonderful as that portrait is, if we imagine the portrait that's above your heads right now, if there was an oral narration of what perhaps those people are talking about, what we imagine they're talking about, if there's a narration, if there's a soundtrack of the water of the ships on the bay coming forward, of people laughing, of children laughing, of crying, of arguments, of the drummer drumming, that makes you feel more attached to what the representation of this whole park would be, whichever part you're into. So in addition to the other elements that we're looking for, more specific visualization of diversity, of inclusion, of industriousness, I think that oral element of it is going to make this one of the most special and most engaging elements of this whole creation.
I've heard that there's some sort of United Nations effort to install something in...
UNESCO.
Yeah, your international port marker.
Excuse me?
International port marker, which represents those people who were enslaved, where they were where they landed here approximate in the city dock area.
Is that underway?
That is underway. There is, from what I understand, there is I would say a mock design of it that was actually debuted over a year and a half ago, on November 1st, see, this is 2024, 2023, of 2022 at Asbury Church. Subsequent to that, there was another port marker ceremony that was held at London Town this recent November 1st. It's always held on the commemoration of the abolition of slavery in Maryland of the 1864 Constitution. It should be, on the far end where you see the pergola on the design area, what was initially envisioned, and I don't think we're changing that at this point, would be on, as I'm facing it, on the left-hand side, the left-hand corner area.
Okay. You talked to Mr. Reichel about this?
We've mentioned it. We've mentioned it. Yeah.
All right. Let's get into not a sexy subject, although floodwaters aren't that sexy anyway. What about utilities? I mean, there's a fair number of utilities that are, that crisscross and are underground. And what's going on with that?
Yeah, I mentioned in the presentation, pretty significant. So we did go through a process of CCTVing existing sewer systems, so not in good condition. So the plan is to replace the existing sewer system and tie those in, at project limits, new water lines in the project area. And those would include, fire connections to the curb lines for all existing buildings in accordance with, with city requirements. So pretty, and we're also there's an existing standpipe system out there now, so that standpipe has had some issues. So that is going to be rebuilt, reconstructed, and improved. So the fire marshal did require replacement of that standpipe system for their use for fire events in the marina area.
What about power lines and existing telephone?
That's actually probably more significant than the water sewer lines because of the we're going through a consolidation effort. I think I mentioned this, that I don't know what the best term is, but there's been many things in City Dock over many years, been continuing to add on. For obviously there was the normal street lighting and different things like that, but for all the this is an event space, it's a public space. So for some of the events, they have very specialty power needs. So the idea is to consolidate all of that and turn that into more of a system that's much more easily maintained and operated. So that's part of this initiative, is to and all those power systems would be underground, new transformers, new cabinets and different things like that. So pretty significant electrical system. And we are adding in, additional functionality. The fountain needs lights, all the specialty lighting. We have a stage, which is, a entertainment venue, so they have certain power needs. A stormwater pump station has power needs, and marine blackwater pump stations. I mean, so there's a lot of things that the city just uses normally in addition to the event power needs. So that's all being reconstructed with new systems.
I got the impression that you're going to be undergrounding all of this, or is it going to use existing utility poles, or what?
That system, once it does arrive at City Dock, there's still some discussion of completely undergrounding everything within City Dock. But all the new systems that I just talked about, accessing all those things, would obviously be underground. It's the main power feeds right now, which I believe the city is exploring that, but it's not currently, I guess there's not current budget available for that undergrounding for everything coming in that BG&E owns. So there's a lot of...
There's not a current budget for it?
That's correct. It's just the power lines right there fronting those buildings along Dock Street are the only ones right now. They're not included in this electrical consolidation effort.
So I just can't remember. Are there poles out? There are poles there now, or?
Yes.
So those will, at least for the time being, will be still impediments in the pedestrian realm?
Correct. I think there is a plan to replace those, and I believe the city would love to, but right now project has budgetary constraints, so we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So we're,
How easy is it to do that later? Is that like once you end up putting all of the new Dock Street in, you're not going to touch that? So like you effectively preclude yourself from doing that?
You wouldn't preclude yourself. There would be some, reworking of some of the finishes, but that could be accomplished. It's mainly the primary lines running in, so there would be some, there would conduit and ducts running along, in that sidewalk. And there's different ways to do that. We could, go with a system where we put removable panels, right behind the existing curb, for a foot or 16 inches, and then they can just excavate that area. Sometimes these are typically pretty shallow, a couple foot excavation. So there's ways to do that and minimize the impacts that exist, that sidewalk after it was constructed, if that's the funding is not
refresh my memory, are
identified.
the poles up around at the part towards Randall Street too, in front of those businesses? I just can't remember.
Well,
Been down a million times and I just don't have a picture of that in my head.
right now it's just along the face there of the, I guess is the east.
Okay.
Yeah, from the Harbor Master up, I guess, is along Dock Street is where the existing pole run along those, the Dock Street buildings. And our project, essentially the public improvements and paving and so forth stops right there at Randall Street. So we're not changing anything on Randall Street as part of this project.
It is part of this project. Is that what you said?
No.
No. So there are poles between Randall Street and Craig Street?
Yes.
Yes. So
That's correct.
They're going to remain, at least for the short term. So, okay. Well, I'll stop there because I have some questions about that part of the project that when it's my turn, I'll focus on. So
My last question is directed towards Mr. Turner. You mentioned something about no vehicular access along the promenade from Craig Street all the way down to the water. Is that your...
Yeah, there will be along Ego Alley, there will be fire truck access. It'll have
non-emergency.
Right, but non-emergency, it will be very limited on Dock Street beyond Craig Street. And in other words, only emergency vehicles we really foresee getting through there. And there could be some other access for some reason, possibly for service vehicles, but not your average motorist.
Okay.
If I could just add to what Bryce has said, we've also been working closely with the boat show so that when they set up and take down, they'll have some access.
Right, I understand that. There are these buildings along Dock Street back onto Prince George. Every one of them goes through, correct?
Right, correct.
Right, okay.
Correct.
So any service vehicles can all access any of those buildings along Prince George Street?
That's correct, right.
Okay.
So do you envision deliveries, those types of things in the morning, all that being done on Prince George Street or through this access road?
No, Prince George Street?
Yes, Prince George Street. Obviously, with the boat show, it's going to be completely different. We'll have vehicles all over the place, but yes, for deliveries there, and that's currently how the restaurant is serviced, and that would continue.
And the proposed hotel, that's how access would be.
There's no. We haven't designed for the hotel.
No. Nothing on the table? Well, I can just, as a comment, I would just say that we're spending huge amounts of public money for a public park, and it would be a shame then to damage it by giving private access on a public thoroughfare. I mean, this is quite a promenade, and to put taxis and buses there would be kind of a desecration of your work.
Agreed. And it's the WUNRF that, we discussed with the Planning Commission at length, and I think we all agree it's a great idea. It's important. This is a community walkable pedestrian space, and I think that's one of the beauties of the plan.
Did you have some more questions?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of sort of disparate questions, but we'll eventually focus on the stuff between Craig Street and Randall Street. But so I just have a bunch of questions that came up as I reviewed the materials, and the issue of the critical area mitigation. So you're going to pay a fee in lieu, and so that fee, just so I understand, that fee goes into a fund that the city can use for other projects elsewhere, for other public projects. Is that how that gets used?
That's our understanding. It does come back to the city in a dedicated fund for very specific uses, yes.
Is it, and maybe this is not a fair question for you guys, it's more city, and this is a little weird because the applicant is the city, so I don't know who should answer that, but is that going to be its own fund, or does it get put into, a fund with other fees in lieu? I just want to understand how that works.
Maybe Tom can answer.
If I may.
Please.
That'd be great.
There is you probably noted in the staff report, there's a condition that speaks to that fee in lieu, which is a little over 1.8 million.
Right.
And it actually makes reference to a memorandum of understanding that the city has with the State Critical Area Commission. And in that memorandum of understanding, there is a list of types of projects that this money can be spent towards, and the state wants to see and actually monitor how that money is spent and where.
Okay.
Yes.
I forget, was that MOU in the staff report, or is that just
It was referenced in the condition. It was not actually attached to it. No, sir.
Okay, thanks. All right, that was just one sort of standalone question.
And if I could add to the question that you both have been raising about the undergrounding, again, a comment from Alderwoman Tierney that there is a budget line item for undergrounding power poles that the state has given the city money, and that would include certainly part of what's been discussed this evening.
Yes. Okay. So next, one thing that I wanted to ask a few questions about Donner Park, because we've seen, some images, but we never had any focus on Donner Park, and throughout all of the presentations, leading up to this, there's never really much focus on that. So I wanted to sort of poke at that a little bit, just so I understand what's going on there.
It's basic, so it's becoming a green space from this promenade back to Compromise Street. We've again kept the center fairly open so that it can be used for. Sorry, I don't. So we've kept the center purposely open, so the trees are to the edge, so that it can still be used for events like the boat show. Farmers market could set up in there. We've only really planted ornamentals at this edge and then at the perimeter.
Yeah. So on the perimeter, on the other side against the street, I think there was an image that sort of was a little bit far away. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So is there a reason that wall is there?
Part of it is the existing wall, and we were just continuing that wall, but
what's the elevation on the other side of it?
it is elevation.
I mean, it's up,
4.
so
I think it's 4, yeah.
So that wall's acting as basically as a retaining wall?
No, it's the same.
So-
it's just a separation wall.
So that's what I thought, and that's why I was sort of coming down this path, is to me that wall acts as a separator to keep people out of the park. And I mean, I know why it was there in its current incarnation as a parking lot, is because you want to sort of separate the sidewalk from the parking lot so you don't spill into the parking lot. But, to me, as you're walking down there, especially because it's a kind of a narrow sidewalk, it sort of telegraphs to me that I really shouldn't go in there because there's a wall.
Well, I should say that actually we have the entrance there to the left, we have an entrance to the right, and we will have one in the center. That was one of the requests, was to have a 12-foot opening in the center. So really, it's pretty pervious.
So why do you even have the wall? I mean, what, other than because it's there already, why not get rid of it?
We probably could. It's just demo. It's more.
But this is, what I was getting at is there's not an engineering need for it, or there's not, it's just legacy?
No.
Okay, so that's, something to think about. It sort of opens it up a bit. Another kind of, just a question I had about the review material. So there was a document in there that had, 10 pages of comments from different departments. This is a question for Mr. Smith. Comments from different departments and, what the disposition of those would be. We're going to look at it, whatever the ABC. In the package that we have, those comments that were all in that document are not included. Is that the right way to look at that? So staff from other departments looked at the plans that we were given, came up with those comments, and they haven't been folded back in. Is that the right way to look at that?
I think what you're going to see is those comments addressed as this project continues on.
Okay.
Right. As we get into permitting phases and future phases of detail and further design.
Okay. Because it's, some of the things that I wanted to, the last thing that's maybe going to take a little more time reflects a lot of those comments. And, as we've worked in the past with applicants that aren't the city, when there are things that we think need to be addressed, in the past we've said, okay, we put them in conditions and they go into conditions, and sometimes they get done, sometimes they don't get done. So part of where I'm going with this is, if there are things that we're going to want to be changed because they're important to change, we're going to want to see those changed. And because, look at the staff report. It incorporates all the drawings and the numbers that we've been given. And, I think, I can't speak for the other commissioners, but if we incorporate the staff report that has those conditions that staff put, we're going to want it to include all of the things that we think need to be changed, not okay, we'll get to it. And, not to be critical of anybody in the room, sometimes they get to it, sometimes they don't. And that's just, I'm being just really upfront about this, and it has nothing to do with you guys, but it's more like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Because we've had some examples of that over the years, and we want to be really careful about that.
And we have met extensively to address most of those comments. And I think what I hear you saying is, if there are comments that are expected by a specific department to be addressed in the future, you want to see that included.
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to actually see it.
That's fine.
Written in the plans that get adopted and not sort of buried in a condition someplace. Anyway, that's another story we can get to later. But okay, so the thing that I really wanted to talk about in a little more detail is the area between Craig Street and Randall Street. So essentially the parking lot. So the issue that I'm having is that, so we did see something on your presentation that where the existing line was, and that you're going to make the sidewalk a little wider. What I've seen in all of this, and this has struck me in throughout all of the presentations that we've seen so far, is that you have this, so go back one. So you have this fantastic view down Dock Street. But now if you back up another, 500 feet, so you're standing on Randall Street, you basically have to look through a parking lot to get to the good stuff. And especially with a narrow sidewalk, because like the way it looks now, with a really narrow sidewalk, you get people all crammed on the sidewalk, you got cars coming in and out of there, and people, the visceral sense that I get is that you look at that and say, ugh, I don't want to go down there, even though if you get to Susan Campbell Park, it's nice. You get to look at the water, and obviously in this view of the world, it's going to be orders of magnitude better. But still, to me, with essentially such a narrow sidewalk on the north side of that parking lot, you're essentially going to devalue $50 million worth of work for what, 6 parking spaces? So, I mean, so I really need to look, okay, this is great. Yeah, go back to that one.
This is it.
Yeah. So, I think because of the way those parking spaces, and I presume based on the, the drawings of the bus turnaround stuff, that makes that sort of corner up there really narrow. And it just acts as the pinch point. And, I understand the reasons for the turnarounds and that kind of stuff, but a lot of that could be mitigated without that top row parking. And, basically bring the sidewalk down more. Because I think you really need to be able to carry the width of the sidewalk that you have at the corner of Dock Street and Randall Street. You got to carry that all the way to the good stuff at Dock Street, the pedestrian realm. Otherwise, you're devaluing all of this effort and money you're putting in such a nice park. And for what, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parking spaces? So, the question, so I apologize for not asking my question first before I made a statement, but what I wanted to ask you guys is about the accounting, the detailed accounting of parking spaces, because I know this is going to come up. So, part of the deal in this whole program was the no net loss of spaces. So now that Hillman's done, we know how many spaces there. You know how many you're losing out of Donner, and you know how many you're losing here. What's the accounting? Are you plus or minus? I mean,
we are plus a few if you include Hillman and this area, but we've always counted these spaces.
Right. So I guess my point is, if you got rid of 7, does that make you negative?
We would be close. But,
all right. So it's.
I mean, we're in that range
right.
where it's close, and this was really a compromise with the business community that was part of the task force with the action group.
I totally understand.
So that's. I mean, I would be happy to. I agree with you in a lot of ways. We have chipped away at some of that parking already by making those planters and these kidney-shaped elements, canoes, we call them, a little larger. And so that we've got some landscaping in there. The sidewalk is larger, of course, for most of that stretch.
But you're also putting planters there, which takes that away. And plus you got poles. I don't know where the poles are in this design. Are they right in the middle of the sidewalk? Because the sidewalk's pretty narrow now. The poles are sort of at the curb. So if you don't move the poles and you move the curb out, now you're going to have poles in the middle of the sidewalk. Again,
I'm really pushing for and trying to fight that challenge as well with you, and have been asking the question. We would love to get those power lines underground. There's no question. And the savings to do it now is probably not as compelling as you might think. However, it would be great to get it done now, because all of a sudden it's going to look like an eyesore later. Even though we tend to get used to them and look beyond them, we would love to get rid of those, but they are not currently in the budget to have those.
Yeah,
not to have all of them go in.
Yeah, given that the poles, you don't have the money to get rid of the poles, that sort of makes more emphasis to needing a wider sidewalk, because if you're going to have a pole in the middle of the sidewalk, you're going to have people pushing strollers and doing whatever they do on the sidewalks. And, maybe you need to have access to go around poles and stuff like that. So I think that sort of only supports the idea of really not giving up that space for, 7, 8 parking spots. And if the issue is ADA stuff, make half of those spots ADA spots. I mean, if that's what people are worried about, that's fine.
It's really the bus turnaround that's dictating that, and even if we took some of those spaces away, we'd still need that entire radius to get those you see where we have bus parking.
Yeah, so that's, I thought about that, having looked at the drawings that have the ambulance and the bus turnaround. So I've seen all that. So maybe that's an example of you make the sidewalk wide. I mean, because it's not like you're going to have a bus going through every 2 minutes, like a city bus or something. These are buses that come down to service the watermark boats and such. And they do come frequently, a couple a day, maybe, I don't know, 5 a day or something like that. But it's not like they come every minute. You could make it so the turnaround is one level that's brick, and, for the time that the bus is there, the bus sort of goes up on the brick. This idea of, if this is going to be a pedestrian space, much like the rest of dock space, don't segment it. Make it ambiguous. That's fine. I get it if it's.
We would love to see it all brick, but
budget
restrictions.
But the compromises like that still allow you to have the bus turn around in a practical way. But it doesn't totally demark the space. This is for cars, and sort of throw the pedestrians to the side. Since, if the buses are only 5 buses a day on certain days, most of the time it's going to be people walking. So let's give the space to the entity that's going to get the most use out of it, but without precluding the ability of a bus to turn around. So I just think there's some more creativity that could be done here to accommodate that. Because again, I just hate to see this huge investment that everybody's making sort of devalued by short shrifting the pedestrians. So I think it.
And I think we always saw that as a future
that's where I am on
phase. It was always discussed that would be a future phase, perhaps the bricking of that, and perhaps removing more parking spaces once we convince people of that, and the fact that maybe cars are different.
But is there the reason I went down this line of asking for an accounting of the idea of the no net loss? Is there a formal or informal agreement that there will be 2 lanes of parking there? I mean, you sign something with the business owners that says, they're going to take you to court if you take those out?
Well, it was very much the understanding it's part of the consensus plan.
Yeah, but the informal accounting is that there's a little bit of wiggle room, and as Mr. Pline's pointing out, you're only talking, 7 or 8. I mean, it's no big deal, and you could always make if the few shop owners there are upset or concerned or anxious, you could always make some of those internal parking spaces 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So that they can jump in and get their Christmas ornament and jump back out. And they're not intended to be longer term. They're intended to be shorter term.
So part of what we heard is that the buses are, we're showing 2. We've heard it's sometimes 8 at a time, and they're all day long in the summer. They're real, in fact, the last 2 rows, we've talked about having the buses be able to park on the diagonal there, take those last several to allow for more buses there. But as it turns out,
We actually changed that. We didn't want to provide a rule the wrong way.
Right.
So that whole south curb line of Dock Street is now bus parking, pull-off area, and we've already lost those spaces that's shown on this rendering, if you will. So if you go,
I can't hear you. Could you repeat that, please?
the site plan that I showed, it showed that area along the south side of Dock Street is all bus parking. There's no vehicle parking in that area.
Bus parking alongside alongside the promenade, the waterside promenade?
Yes, sir.
That's bus parking?
Yes, sir.
So the buses are going to sit there and idle?
I think they
And talk about devaluing?
drop off and go a certain period of time. I don't know about the operations specifically, but go ahead. But we looked at maybe taking the center areas and diagonal parking buses in there, but we didn't want to create buses pulling out the wrong way and the turning radius wasn't working and they'd have to back out or something. So to provide, and as another stakeholder, is the entities that run, the bus operators and tourism in town here. So the compromise was to lose those spaces along Dock Street to the south side, the regular vehicular parking, and turn that into a bus drop-off lane. I wouldn't specifically call it bus parking.
It's our understanding that the buses actually park remotely. This is just drop off. There's no parking here for buses.
Yeah,
Hope so.
just as a footnote, they go over to Eastport and park and idle.
Yeah,
When
they
they
should go
should be at the stadium, parking and idling.
Yes.
I mean, this area should be envisioned as a drop-off.
That's all it is. It's just a drop-off for the buses.
Yeah, but they're coming in and they're turning around, and look what we're losing, as Mr. Klein says. We're losing a broad sidewalk up towards Craig Street.
Anyway, so those I guess are, we've said, I think, all we have to say about that, but maybe you can think more about that, because I'm sure we'll talk about it in our deliberations at some point.
I think just to put a cap on that, I think it's a legitimate issue, but design teams work very hard to, as Eileen mentioned, meet with numerous stakeholders, and that is, another stakeholder. We tried to listen and be sensitive to their concerns also. So,
yeah, I mean,
balancing a lot of different things.
I've paid attention to the discussion for the last few years on that, so I understand. One question about the fountain. One of the things that's come up in a lot of the sort of fountains in the DC area is this idea of dipping your feet versus swimming. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a big sort of argument that you don't foresee any problems with that. I mean, so this could be couple inches deep there. I mean,
it's possible the most it would be 2 to 3, but I think the fountain designers are really envisioning a scrim of water.
Okay, so really more of the splash pad sort of idea than a
yeah, if you know the fountain in the famous one in Millennial Park in Chicago that has it's just a big plane and 2 jets spitting into it. That's sort of the type we're looking at with draining.
I would caution you not to make it deep enough that sort of could be considered swimming, because then you get into this whole sort of discussion of dipping versus swimming, and it's like a Pandora's box you don't want to open.
Right.
So that's something to consider also. And so I had one question about the programming. I mean, it's obviously important. And I think it's important that it all be resilient to how we use the park, in the sense that you don't want to do something that seems like a good idea now, but then in 5 years not such a good idea. I mean, you agree that it's most of what's going to happen in that active space is it's all movable and can be shifted around, and nothing's sort of really permanent, in the sense that if something doesn't work, you can shift it around and adjust on the fly to have resilience in that standpoint.
Right. I mean, I think the idea is that actually becomes a stage, like in the Singer-Songwriter Festival, they put the stage right about where we have the bus shown in the rendering out in Dock Street, and that whole area would be filled with people. So we would push everything to the side.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to that's how I interpret it from all of the stuff we've looked at. I just wanted to make sure that was proper.
It's really to make that a flexible space, and that also is big enough to accommodate the tent. There's a tent size that we were working with to accommodate. The boat show goes there.
Yeah, and then just the last question I had about programming. Yeah, it's obviously an important piece of this park, because what happens in the park is going to sort of make or break it in some ways. But from our job of evaluating this application, and this may be a question for Mr. Smith, where do you recommend that we would evaluate programming? Or do we even, is that something that's just sort of part of the consistency with the comp plan? There's nothing in the, for example, site plan requirements that say you evaluate programming with a certain set of standards. So we're just sort of,
Who would be in charge? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I mean,
Someone
just
to book the
things
park or
about,
something?
it could even be what Mr. Haley mentioned about all of that stuff. I mean, how do we, what's your suggestion on how we evaluate that? Or do we even? It's just something that happens in the park after it's built. It's more of a sort of a technical question for the commission. Because it's talked a lot about, but I want to make sure that we understand what to do with that. So they don't have to answer that question now, but I think it's important for us to get some guidance on that.
I think it's important because when you look at a site plan, you also need to look into the future.
Yeah.
And who maintains what and who decides what that goes on there is very important, because it needs to be a lot of fun. It needs to be
We
variety.
talked about yoga, on one of the slides, yoga in the park. Like, who would, if someone was going to do that, where would they book that? Who's in charge of that?
Parks and Rec Department,
is
basically,
Parks and Recs is handles
yeah.
all the booking. So including concerts and things of that nature.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, is that any different than how we do things now anyway? We have events down there. We had the singer-songwriter.
Right.
John O'Leary runs the Shamrock, the Dock. It seems like it's just an extension of what we're already doing.
Okay,
Tug of war.
there's an answer.
Fair.
I mean, it's being designed as a passive park. So generally, when you're looking at programming for active parks, that's when you're talking about recreation fields and things like that. That's not what this is. So that's when you really need to be concerned about programming, is because you've got to figure out, how many under 10s how many fields do I need to accommodate under 10s? How many large fields do I need for adult soccer? Those sort of things. That kind of programming is really important when you're doing active recreational parks. This is a passive park, and it's really organic. I mean, I think you'll be surprised. I mean, we do these all over the country, and I think you'll be surprised and excited about how many cool things people think of to do here. And we can't begin to predict what they'll be, but I can imagine amazing games and, things they do at the Inner Harbor, where they float these cardboard regattas and everybody sinks in the harbor and people love it. People line up to see it. So it's those kind of things that I think will happen organically, and you'll have to schedule the booking is what I would hope and anticipate.
But, with respect to the question that I asked about how we would evaluate that, essentially, we don't. That's
right.
What we have to evaluate, and I'm sort of talking to the commissioners here, what we have to evaluate is how is the layout of the space, how could it accomplish the notional things that you've suggested,
right?
Not necessarily evaluating any particular ideas that were put out in either this presentation or prior presentations.
Right.
I think you guys agree with that?
I agree with you. I mean, I think it's more about the physical space and the engineering and the park itself, and let Parks and Rec do what they do. That's not my purview.
Okay, that's my line of sort of all across the waterfront, if you will, comments. So, anybody else?
Got all mine. Parking is what I get hit with all the time out in the community, so I think that one little space comes down to that one little space, and it sounds like you've engaged all of the stakeholders, and it's complicated. I understand. The buses throws another wrench into it. I guess Alex's idea of possibly having it more bricked and being able to kind of come over top of those bricks to turn the buses around. Sounds like you've already done a pretty good job of figuring out the best solution for who you're talking to. Now, the one thing that I'm come back to is the poles themselves and the wires. And if you have an opportunity to bury that stuff, that should be done from the start. I mean, it's not just a use case and a function. It's a beautification project at the same time. And for me, it just seemed, not to mention, isn't there some value? I mean, I'll ask the engineer of actually having less maintenance ultimately over time. So there's savings over time. And I don't know. The community I moved out of had underground everything, and it was beautiful. And we had these lamp posts, and it was awesome. And now I live in one that still has all these wires, and I can't help but notice it all the time. So if we're going to make this huge investment, I don't know the cost of something like that, but it just seems like it would be an important thing to try to do from the start rather than go back after the fact, like Mr. Turner's saying. We could do that later, but why?
I think everyone on this side of the table agrees with you.
Yeah, okay. I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure. I guess it's just a cost factor.
One
right?
thing I think the city and the design build team has done is they have, approached BG&E, at least to try to initiate that design, and instead of just like throwing numbers, well, it's this much, to actually understand how much that costs to see the magnitude of that problem. But again, we'd prefer not to overpromise and then underdeliver and have to come back here and have another conversation. So right now it's deemed as not affordable, but I think they're still exploring those the options there and trying to determine exactly how much that would cost the project.
Well, and I hear the argument for urgency, and having seen what happened just last week, I agree with the urgency. So you wouldn't want to hold up such a huge project and all the urgency of that in the interest of a few aesthetics that could be changed further down the road.
We received three questions, maybe two of them maybe have been from one person. Grass, Mr. Reichel. With respect to the grass to be planted, there was a comparison made to the returfing project on the National Mall. Large sections of the mall were closed for long periods after the grass was planted. How long will the grassy areas be closed once the park opens? In other words, work may be done, but the grassy areas are still being grown.
So
it's the timing of
the timing of when you
plant,
destroy it by having a show, an event there, and then
Well, I would start with implementation.
Implementation. I think we're budgeting for sod, that you'll have instant. It's going to look great day one. We probably won't allow people on it for 3 to 4 weeks because you want it to take the roots to take hold. We also periodically in parks, you'll see it'll say that they'll put up a little fence if you do have a big festival there and the grass is still alive but it's really been trampled. We'll say, please give our lawn a rest. You see that all the time in parks. We do it in downtown Baltimore all the time. The Waterfront Partnership does that, and it's very successful. People honor it. And that's usually a 2 to 3 week. I mean, grass is really resilient. It pops back pretty quickly.
All right.
So if that's the answer,
Well, I got two answers.
Okay.
Not bad from one question. The first answer is that it will be planted as sod, and that a period of a month or so in order to get it established. People stay off, and then later, after high traffic events, you'll want to give it another rest of maybe 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the weather.
Depending on the time of year, right.
Okay, so I'm going to accept those as answers, hopefully on behalf of the person who asked the question. Engineer, number one, confirm the pump station locations and if visible or underground.
Back to the site plan. Yours? Yeah.
Do you have a slide?
I'm just going to go to the site plan. It showed more called the engineering drawing instead of Scott's really nice renderings here. Some maybe, yeah, actually, we actually have it shown very, very hard to see, but within the parking area, right near the little pork chop island on the right side, you'll see a circle. So we have an underground wet well pump station, and there would be access hatches in the top to retrieve the pumps and service the pumps. So all the control systems would be above ground, but it's an underground pump station. So with completely, all you're going to see is a concrete slab there in the middle of that asphalt parking area.
When you say the control stations will be what, above ground?
Control cabinets, yes. Currently, those are being planned at the corner of Prince George Street and Craig Street on the back.
So they're even off, right at the upper corner of that middle of the drawing there, huh?
Yes.
It's not really in the park area.
Correct.
Okay. So the answer is that the pump stations are going to be underground.
Pump station one, just one.
Just one. But the control stations are off the park and over on Prince George.
Yes.
Okay. Second question is, can you speak to when they will kick in? That is, what their flood height limit is. I guess it's when they would start pumping. How are they going to work?
So the system is designed so in like normal rain conditions, the water, the majority of the water is filtered and goes through the bioretention, microretention, all those systems. But let's talk about sort of like the parking area in that area. So those, the system is designed that that would still flow out into, like it does today, into Spa Creek. And those outfall points, there's penetrations in the bulkhead wall, maybe a technical term, but we're going to put check valves in there so the water can't come back up through. So in those lower storm events, nothing changes sort of how it is today. The primary purpose for the pump station is when the flood system is activated. When you have, the flood barrier system is activated, you have those larger events that be able to pump the water out that gets sort of trapped behind, or also larger storm events. If it starts ponding in there, then you can in this area. Then you can the system would know that, and it would fill up that wet well, and the pumps would be activated and pump the water out.
What's the drainage area that this pump station will affect?
It's probably 2/3 of this, 2/3 of the city dock area proper. So probably somewhere around 2 acres.
Okay.
We can get detailed numbers on that if the record needs to correct it, but that's my guesstimate from just sitting here, not looking at the data.
Okay. I hope that answers that person's question. Last question that I got is view sheds. Are the view sheds based on existing Dock Street buildings staying? Specifically the Latitude restaurant, and if so, how is that elevation difference treated? Now, I think if I can interpret the question, it's talking about, first of all, the view sheds based on existing buildings, and what if something happens to the Latitude restaurant, in other words, the elephant in the room hotel?
We're designing it as to the building that exists. So in the view shed, I think you'll see that we actually have, their elevation is lower than the promenade, the existing elevation. So you'll step up about, I believe it's 1.5 feet, 18 inches max in the worst case scenario. But we can't really, it's just off the screen here. You can't really,
yeah,
it's difficult to see, but their door frames will, we obviously are designing they have to maintain access. So that stays low, the promenade goes up, and the trees are the transition between them, and there's there's curbs. It starts at a curb level and then goes up to the step, then it goes up to 2 steps as you move further up. And the worst case, I think, is 3 steps.
So along the promenade along the building front
Remains.
stays level?
That's right.
At their door level, okay.
Right.
Yeah, that,
We're maintaining that quote-unquote sidewalk along the building frontages to all those, doors for several feet there, and then it steps up to the promenade, to the Wooner.
And your view shed from Main Street, now you took a photograph from the foot of Main Street,
That's right.
not from higher up Main Street?
Right. We've walked Main Street and looked, and there, it's, the higher up you go, the better your view. Obviously, you're getting higher and you can see more of the water. So we were kind of picking the worst case scenario down at the bottom of Main Street. Which frankly, the trees in the circle block, a good portion of that view.
Let's leave that subject for a later time.
Yeah, right. I know.
Okay, we may get this question clarified later. All right. At this point, I think that the presentation is finished. What I think would make sense is that we take maybe a 10-minute break, give everybody a chance to, refresh themselves, as they say. And then we will head into public testimony and comment. So let's take a 10-minute break, maybe, okay? Get back here at 20 of.
That's 15 minutes. 14. Don't tell less, and then.
Before we begin the actual public testimony, I do have one sort of final question, and that is in terms of the flood walls and gates and various things that you've suggested here. Are they finalized, or are you looking for some next step to finalize them?
You want to go to that slide? Yeah, we have this slide here, and it shows the the various systems. It all sort of works together. I would say in some areas it's pretty final. We pretty much know that the area adjacent to the lawn area, the park, we would have 8-foot elevation, not 8-foot elevation, 8 walls there. And around the stage and pergola, that would all, we'd have essentially a solid wall to elevation 8. With the movable systems, we made a very specific recommendation to city, to Public Works. That recommendations being reviewed, and the city is looking at from reviewing that from a maintenance standpoint, an operations standpoint. When you have a flood event, like how much is involved to mobilize, a storage of like temporary devices. I mean, so there's several questions that's frankly beyond the purview of the design team, and Public Works needs to make those decisions. So that's why it was a little bit vague. I think probably 80% of this is pretty well baked, but there's a couple areas that we're not, we haven't really confirmed based on the input we're receiving from Public Works. So, and that's been a relatively recent, that submittal was in the last, couple weeks. And so I would think if Public Works Director was here, would probably give you a little bit better answer of where they stand and how they're evaluating this and what's going to be important for Public Works.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Piper. So what I'm gathering from that is that perhaps Mr. Vogel, the head of the Department of Public Works, is the person to answer that question?
Yes, that'd be correct.
Well, we'll take that as we design our schedule. We'll take that under consideration. Thanks. All right, good. Thank you for that answer. And now it's time for public testimony. I'm going to repeat some of my requests, admonishments, and instructions. Use the lectern, identify yourself, give us a name or an email, and be constructive. This is hopefully a collaborative process rather than a confrontational one. So what I have here so far is a Mr. Joel Dunn.
Mr. Chairman. There we go. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for having me. I'm Joel Dunn. I'm the President and CEO of the Chesapeake Conservancy, where our mission is to conserve the natural and cultural resources of the Chesapeake Bay watershed for present and future generations. I also live just out of the side of the city, so I love this city very much. My organization is a leading advocate for the Chesapeake National Recreation Area, which would highlight our landscape and the national significance of the Chesapeake Bay. Our organization's doing lots of endeavors in the city, like helping to create Elktonia Carrs Beach Heritage Park, which honors the legacy of Carrs Beach and some of our coolest history in the city. And Mr. Chairman, as you well know, very much involved in the preservation of Greenberry Point conservation area, but we also are committed to restoring our lands and waters in the Chesapeake. Annapolis is ground zero for sea level rise, as we saw in last week's storm, which brought a storm surge of 5.1 feet, the third highest ever recorded. The Mid-Atlantic in general is leading the east coast of the U.S. in sea level rise, with a unique challenge due to land subsiding in the accelerating rate of sea level rise. And since 1950, sea level in Annapolis has risen 10 inches. We're facing an additional inch every 5 years. The urgency to see progress towards improvements at City Dock is palpable, and there's no debate about what's happening.
The time to act is now. So today marks an important hearing on the latest plans for a new climate-resilient city dock, and the planned improvements will prevent floods in several ways with a new city dock raised by 8 feet that incorporates green spaces to absorb stormwater, expanded seawalls to block tidal floods, raisable panels to prevent water intrusion during storm surges, combined with new seawalls at the Naval Academy. These measures will provide robust defenses for the historic Annapolis waterfront, and the plans are a product of a great consensus effort developed through community input. They envision a premier waterfront with pedestrian access, green public spaces, historic Burtis House, and a maritime welcome center with enhanced views and access to the water. And the upgrades feature the latest environmental site design for stormwater and flood risk, cooling tree canopies, light surfaces, and water features are all in place to counteract heat impacts, cultural and historic elements that will make a visit to Annapolis really, truly memorable and wonderful. And with the completion of the Hillman Garage renovation last year, that was a big step that enabled the replacement of an eyesore waterfront parking lot with a beautiful and functional public space fitting for the gateway to the Chesapeake Bay. In the spirit of Joni Mitchell, we'll unpave paradise and take out a parking lot. The new city dock provides a waterfront that reflects its importance for Annapolitans and visitors to the Chesapeake and provides desperately needed resiliency measures for our community. I urge your support for this plan so that the city of Annapolis can realize a more resilient and vibrant gateway to the Chesapeake Bay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Coming from a prominent conservation environment, Chesapeake Conservancy is behind
more land preservation, waterfront land preservation along the Chesapeake Bay and the contributing rivers than any other organization in Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, and so forth. So, Karen Brown.
Good evening, Chairman Wallman, Commissioners. My name is Karen Brown, and I'm the President and CEO of Historic Annapolis at 18 Pinckney Street in Annapolis. For years, Historic Annapolis has been a partner in reimagining City Dock for the protection of downtown Annapolis. We are very excited that we're at the stage of the design process and that it is advanced to this point and that construction is scheduled or anticipated to begin this year. Again, as Joel had said, as we've all experienced Annapolis's third highest water level last week, we know that the vulnerability of City Dock and the buildings in the historic district are at real risk of damage and loss. We are largely in support of this park, and for flood protection, I have just a couple of sections that comments that I want to mention. A lot of my comments were already addressed by the commissioners, but I want to point to two key issues, and one that is of resiliency. Environmental resiliency is the crux of the substantial project and public investment, and we should not lose sight of that. And as Zoe had mentioned earlier, floodwaters do not discriminate. And again, we have stressed the necessity for completing the flood barrier protection around Ego Alley from the Park side to Dock Street to the lower side of Compromise Street as soon as possible and sharing that plan with the public. We understand that the city is working intently with private property owners on Compromise Street to reach a complete protection beyond the Donner lot. And we urge the city to prioritize the flood barrier protection plan and the funding for implementation. Both sides of Ego Alley must be protected from floodwaters to save our fragile historic landscape. And I want to compliment the city for working so closely with the Naval Academy in their work with this phased approach, but they have a complete plan in place. We know that you are considering major site design in this application, but there are some pieces of the project that are outstanding and they're beyond the scope of the project this evening, including the demolition of the current Harbor Master Building and construction of the proposed Maritime Welcome Center, in addition to the historic Burtis House. But it's unsure how this major site plan can be considered and reviewed in phases. For example, the current Harbor Master Building is slated for demolition for the park when the replacement building has not yet been approved. As far as the park design goes, we have a little bit of apprehension about some of the over-programming and hardscaping, as well as some of the unanswered questions about future funding and maintenance for the new park, and how views will be affected, again, to and from the water. View shed, there was a question earlier about that, is really critical for not only looking at it as you're going out to the water, seeing the park, but then as you're approaching it from the Eastport side. But again, we do support the park and the flood protection, and we're excited to see what's to come. Thank you.
John Thorpe Richards, Jr.
Good evening. My name is John Richards, and I live a block away at 125 Boston Street, overlooking the harbor. I cannot recall any floods that closed Compromise Street when I was growing up here in the 1970s. Now the flooding is a regular occurrence. I was unable to get a ticket to the city's November 1st presentation about this plan, but I watched the rerun on YouTube. And I was very impressed by the importance of the flood protection plan with the floating seawalls. But I was stunned when I heard that the existing plan does not yet cover the full problem area on Compromise Street. It stops at Donner Park, so that the water will be able to flood around the fancy new flood barriers. They don't go far enough. Being in discussion with the Compromise Street owners just proves that this plan is not ready for approval now. It reminded me of the French Maginot Line that only went to the Belgian border, half a wall. That was the 20th century's most notorious failure of public work. We can't afford to invest so much money in half a seawall. And we can't proceed with a plan for expensive add-ons to the crucial flood protection until we know whether the money that is allocated for this plan will be needed to complete the seawall itself. So I think you need to defer any approval of this project until it includes the plan for a deployable seawall that will prevent the flooding of Compromise Street. In other words, make sure that we've secured the full complete solution and the money that it'll take to do it before approving half a plan. Thank you.
Karen Lomax.
Good late evening. My name is Terrence Lomax. I live in Eastport. I've been on the water around here for 50 years. I've lived in Eastport with my wife and son for 45 years. I'm here I also chair the Maritime Advisory Board, but I'm really here because I was a member of the City Dock Action Committee and I was a co-chair of the Maritime Subcommittee. And I support what Mr. Dunn said. I mean, I think the urgency is there. But this is a plan that was, I'm trying to remember, March of 2019 was when this plan, the City Dock Action Committee started. I counted 80 members on that committee, 9 subcommittees, and we worked from March of 2019 well into 2020 to develop this plan. And out of that work came the vision that we've been talking about today, we've talked about for the last 5 years. And that is a vision for City Dock that encompasses visitors from the land, visitors from the water, and residents. And what the programs are going to be on City Dock remains to be seen. It's a wide open slate, so to speak, of what types of programs can be down there. But the one thing that won't happen is any program that isn't protected by the resiliency. That, by the way, that's reminding me that the parking garage wants more money. And I'm trying to learn how to use the app. It's not the easiest. So what the commission has here tonight is actually the start of the resiliency plan and the approval of a plan that's going to provide the resiliency so we can do all these other things. If we don't have a resiliency plan and we don't get it in place, and I share the gentleman's concern about Compromise Street. I'm an attorney. I know the difficulty with dealing with multiple property owners. It's going to take time. It's going to take cajoling. It may take threatening. But it eventually will have to happen, because if they're the only ones getting flooded and Dock Street is protected, they're going to figure out quickly enough that they need to get on board with the plan. But that's just going to take time. But that's not a reason to stop what's been started in 2019. We built a garage so we could get the hardscape off of City Dock, and now it's time to move it along. And I was just simply reminded 2 weeks ago, when, as 2 or 3 people have said, that the flooding that we saw 2 weeks ago, we wound up with a disaster, declaration of disaster. That has to stop. It's time to act. It's time to put a plan in place. This is the plan that's been vetted, approved, endorsed. Yes, there are questions. Yes, there are nuances about what are we going to do with the bus parking. Those are small compared to protecting this piece of property for future use. And I urge this panel, or this commission, to move on, get it approved. Obviously, there's going to be conditions on it. Obviously, they're going to have to come back with more questions, but the basic plan needs to move forward. And I urge you to do so just to protect what we already have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mark Kleinschmidt.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Mark Kleinschmidt, and I have the great privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the Anne Arundel Chamber of Commerce. The chamber has 500 members, businesses. Many are located in Annapolis. A lot are located on Main Street, and a number are located right on City Dock. The chamber supports this plan. I had an opportunity to serve as the co-chair of the business subcommittee on the City Dock Action Committee, and there was a great deal of discussion on all the elements, from the maritime, from the history, from the programming, and from the businesses, from the economic standpoint. Myself, as did millions of other people, got to watch the news last week when reporters were standing in a foot of water looking at the businesses, and interviewed a number of the business owners down there, and they just shook their head. You know, this was the X number of times that this has happened. So it's taking care of the businesses, it's taking care of the environment, it's taking care of the community at large. I think in the future, people are going to look back at the history of this, and somebody may want to write a book about this. In fact, it's kind of interesting. Over Christmas, I got as a gift a book, Memories of a Main Street Boy Growing Up in an Ancient City, written by a guy by the name of Ralph Crosby. Quite a few of you may know Ralph, who runs the Crosby Marketing Agency. It's been here for a long time. Ralph himself was a reporter for a number of years. What was interesting about it, he went on to call Growing Up in America's Ancient City. And this place, Annapolis, isn't just here in America, but it's an international location. And one of the points he made in the book, which I found interesting as he looked at history, he grew up on 183 Main Street, just up the way, frequented City Dock a lot, but how it evolved over time. He went back and referenced in the 1800s how it went through his period in the Great Depression, moving up to the 21st century. And we're at that changing point again, where City Dock needs to involve in something like that, where it protects the environment, it protects the history of Annapolis, and it also protects the business. So from the Chamber's standpoint and from the business community, we urge you. And one other thing, this morning we had our legislative breakfast. We had a large group and quite a few legislators there. There's an absolute buzz about this project. And additional monies, I do believe, are in the governor's budget this year for this project. So hopefully that can put to rest some of the concerns of where the money is going to come from. But the one thing I did find interesting in comments during the breakfast this morning, folks were looking towards Annapolis as a leader, and the terms were talked about. This resiliency effort is going to be a model for not only Maryland and for the East Coast, but quite frankly for the rest of the United States. So again, the Chamber urges passage of this, and we thank you for your consideration.
Mr. Kleinschmidt, before you leave, my clerk reminds me that all I need is an address.
Oh, you can reach me at Mark, AAACCC.org. So that's AAACCC.org.
Thank you. Matt Fleming.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee. My name is Matt Fleming, and I'm the Director of the Resilience Authority for Annapolis, Anne Arundel County. Your Resilience Authority.
Director of what?
The Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. First, I'd like to apologize for how I'm dressed. I volunteer and I help coach a youth hockey team, and I ran over here thinking I was going to be late getting off the ice, and I don't have the mayor's good looks where he can pop off a bike and he looks like Ed Sheeran, so I apologize. So, just a quick note about the Resilience Authority. We're about a year old. I'm pleased to say that we're up and running, and thanks for the expertise that exists across the city, across the county, and of course within my board. We secured nearly about $23 million worth of federal and state grants, and are actively pursuing additional dollars to protect the city and the county from climate threats. But I'm here today to talk about City Dock and this plan and speak in favor of it. Back in November of this year, the 5th National Climate Assessment was released. This is a congressionally mandated report or assessment. It's done about every 4 years with the collaboration of 100 experts from federal government, public institutions, private institutions. It's a massive undertaking that summarizes the impacts of climate on our nation and how our actions are doing to address it. The overwhelming takeaway from this year's assessment is that while adaptation activities are occurring across the U.S., it had increased since 2018. They're too small in scale and taking too long in order to keep pace with the rate of change that we are experiencing. Unfortunately, here in Annapolis, as other speakers mentioned, we don't have to look too far back in history or reference Isabel anymore to talk about the meaning of that finding. If you look at the state of the science, the national assessment, what we saw across our communities last week, what our businesses are still dealing with, I encourage that we take a bias towards action. City Dock has been promised and rebooted many times in the past 3 decades. Prior to my taking the role of Resilience Authority Director, I spent 25 years at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. The majority of that time has served as Maryland's Coastal Zone Program Manager. Every coastal state has a coastal program director. And I remember when I first started at DNR, we were looking at opportunities to how do we address the flooding at City Dock, and ideas, put forward. And, a lot of times, the perfect, people were trying to get the perfect, nothing ever started. Again, thinking back to, so I want to comment, all you guys who have gotten this far with this plan, thinking back to my time on the national stage with other coastal programs, I don't remember a project of this magnitude at the national level that has such a diverse mixture of funding, that underwent such an extensive engagement process in the development of its design. And certainly, I can't do justice to the leadership that Ms. Fogarty has shown over this time, the work of the City Dock Action Committee, as the gentleman mentioned, that has been working on this since 2019. I know this project's expensive. The silver lining is investing in adaptation and resilience can be highly cost effective. That same National Climate Assessment estimated that the anticipated effects of coastal flooding on coastal counties ranges around 3.5 trillion. And taking proactive measures towards resilience can reduce that down to about 800 billion. So to be clear, in closing, the challenges facing coastal communities like the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County are significant and imminent, with more than 500 miles of coastline, which makes our region so unique and wonderful place. It also makes us highly vulnerable. I want to thank you for your leadership and your time tonight, for all your work on this project. And I, as the gentleman just mentioned before, I do think it has the potential to become a national model for communities like Annapolis and other historic cities up and down the East Coast. So thank you. Get my hat.
Give me an address.
Work address, home address.
Oh, we got it.
Yeah.
You're free.
Okay.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak tonight? Then please come forward. And before you name.
Diana Moreau, and my email, is that what you're going to ask? Diana J. Moreau, MOREAU, @gmail.com. And I'll be very brief. I don't want to be the last one holding everyone up. And I'm a former Annapolis resident. I used to live on Prince George Street. Now I'm still consider myself an Annapolitan in a lot of ways, but I do live in Severna Park and come into Annapolis very frequently. And I've also worked on a lot of public-private partnership work. I spent some time at Events DC, where I worked on RFK Stadium, the arena, and other strategic initiatives. So I really appreciate all the work that goes into this. I've been in your shoes, and I know the devil's in the details, and I can kind of come in tonight and hear recaps of where we are. But I guess my point is to just remind everyone that there's so much excitement from the community of what's happening. I bring my kids in constantly. The idea of having a park where I can even have friends from DC come up and see kind of the crown jewel of our community is really exciting. It's frustrating for me when I can't share that water access and privilege with other people that aren't side or don't have a boat or aren't intimately involved with being in Annapolis. So I'm just here to underscore the excitement around everything and urge you to greenlight this so that we can all really see the fruits of your work and enjoy a vibrant community that I know we all want and need and love. So just thank you, and I really appreciate your time for letting me speak.
Step forward.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Peter Follett, 353 Sturtons Lane, Pasadena, Maryland. I am a partner with the Blonder family for the redevelopment of the Latitude 38 site, and I'm an architect and urban planner.
Can you give us an address?
I did. 353 Sturtons Lane, Pasadena, Maryland, 21122. So I submitted some testimony in the email. But in particular, I want to speak a little bit about the edges. And like the gentleman who spoke earlier about Compromise Street, being on the, east or northeast side of the property, we're mostly concerned about the end of Prince George Street and how first of all, let me say that we're fully in support of the park and the initiative. We feel like we've had a lot to do with the conceptual initial concept of it, and the way that the City Dock group developed the plan and the professionals involved have done a beautiful job. We have a great park in front of us and really look forward to seeing it realized. The edges are what we really are worried about and how it interfaces with our property. And in particular, how it ends Prince George Street is very important and something I don't even know if it's appropriate to talk about. But one of the things that at the end of of the Burtis House, there exists a giant wall of electrical boxes, et cetera. Well, that electrical box has now been moved into the street bed of Prince George Street. And that is actually sitting in the view corridor of Prince George Street. I'm not sure if that's something we as a community would really like to see. And so I urge, I don't know if you guys are the right guys to think about that, but someone needs to point that out because it's there, right? And it's a big volume that's about 35 feet wide, 8 feet tall and 8 feet wide. It's a thing that's sitting in the middle, sort of along the eastern side of Prince George Street. So I urge the committee to sort of think about that. And I also urge the committee to think about how that corner of the wall, just like the gentleman said here, how does it connect to along Compromise Street? How does it connect to the Naval Academy? And we can't have a real barrier unless it's a complete barrier. And so I would just urge you and urge the development team to think about how that actually happens and actually articulate it, show it. Let's make sure it's built when the rest of it's built, because otherwise it really won't work, right? Our concern also is how it interfaces with the redevelopment of our property, which we fully intend to do. And hopefully someday we'll be here to talk about that with you all. But those are the general concerns about us. We have other concerns about the visitor center, but we understand that's not on the agenda tonight to talk about. So I wanted to just focus on the seawall and how it connects to the end of Prince George Street. So thank you very much for your time. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the Commission for the opportunity. I will be brief, I promise. Some of you may know that I'm a member of, Jonathan Fry, 156 Conduit Street.
Could you start over again with the name and the address?
Yes, Jonathan Fry, 156 Conduit Street. F-R-E-Y-E. Thank you. I just want to thank you for prioritizing pedestrian access in this project. It's important to me and my family. I'd like to ask that the Commission, however, consider deliveries to what I assume will continue to be commercial properties of one kind or another along the northern edge of the park and pedestrian walkway. Today, deliveries to the businesses along Dock Street business sometimes park in the existing parking lot, which is slated to be halved or thereabouts as a result of this project. I imagine if that at some future point in time there were to be a business that hosted high volumes of itinerant tourists and thus deliveries of food and beverage, linens, and associated equipment with private events, that those delivery trucks that park in the lot today would likely be unable to make such deliveries on Prince George because they can't turn around and wouldn't have the option to do so once the parking lot gets cut in half. So I have concerns about where and how those deliveries would be made, and would ask the Commission and the stakeholders involved in the project whether we should expect more vehicular gridlock in an already geographically constrained area, and whether I should expect that my 4-year-old on his scooter and myself pushing a double stroller along that sidewalk will be dodging an endless parade of delivery dollies using what's identified here as a pedestrian street, so to speak. So I hope that's something that you'll consider as you consider approval of the project. And I've also been advised by my management to express support for a swing set in the park. Thank you.
You were talking about pushing your stroller. What sidewalk were you talking about?
Well, again, I mean, we live right around the corner. right?
What sidewalk were you talking about?
As is identified here as a pedestrian street.
Dock Street?
Sure. Again, it's identified on the screen behind you as a pedestrian street.
Oh, you mean from Craig Street to the water?
That's correct. My question would be, if those buildings that are there today and will continue to be there and be some sort of a commercial property that will require lots and lots of delivery trucks, where are those trucks going to park? And where will the delivery dollies from those trucks be ingressing and egressing? Am I going to have to dip and dodge just to use that sidewalk? Will other pedestrians and tourists be subject to this endless sort of stream of deliveries that are being made because the trucks don't have anywhere else to park? I hope that's something that you'll consider. Thank you.
I heard you.
Good evening. My name is Ellie Tierney. I live at 5 Park Place in Annapolis. I also represent the ward that is significantly hit by flooding. I was not going to speak. I didn't have a testimony, but I feel the mayor I'm channeling the mayor right now. He's not here, and I know what he would probably say. I shared most of the morning with him of that flooding. We were both down here during high tide, and I have to say that anyone who was down there at that time and saw the power of that water would say, with good reason, perhaps, postpone or what have you. No, there is so much power in that water. And that's why God made engineers and architects, to solve this problem. I'm an engineer by college education. I went the construction route, but I'm the one that asked these nerdy questions about the transitions and the pumps. But we can do this. This is a great team, and they have worked hard, and they know the problems, they know the gaps, they know the issues. And I'm convinced that they will solve it. In the meantime, we do have what I call our baby pumps that can work up to, as you know, the infamous 3.5 feet. And after that, they have a problem. But we have that as a backup until we address these issues. But what I found that morning too is, and this is why I ran for office 7 years ago, is I, with my engineering know-how, is I felt the need to address the infrastructure of an aging city, and representing it, I know the vulnerabilities and the value, of our historic structures. We have to protect them. What we have in these wards, Ward 2 and 8, is irreplaceable property. You can't rebuild some of these structures, and I'm not saying that it will go up to, up the hill, but yeah, no, I mean, Bryce House, others, they could be impacted if we don't have this flood wall. So I'm here to say that I feel the obligation to vote, to support the project, but also to thank you, as always, with the sensitive issues that you bring up. Your intelligence. People have to be reminded that you are volunteers, you are residents taking the time to make sure that this is done right. So I really appreciate, as always, the effort and the questions that you ask. So Gavin, if you're listening, I hope I did you worthwhile. Thank you.
Speak now or forever hold your peace. We could hold the public hearing open.
Yeah, I think you should.
Okay. I'm getting some signals from my fellow commissioners that holding this open till February 1st, and there's a second very good reason why I think we should. And that is that some of the very serious questions has arisen about what actually will be the flood walls, what actually will be the floodgates, what actually is happening on Compromise Street, and that the person who needs to answer those questions is the director of the Department of Public Works, Mr. Vogel. And I think that we deserve to have those questions answered. And so that, I think, is an argument for holding this public hearing open until till February 1st. And then I expect a rather expeditious discussion and decision. Is there anything else that needs to be brought up from my fellows? Nothing at this point. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to summarize what was said. We've all heard it, and we've all heard it well. And I want to thank everybody who's appeared here. And I get the sense that many more people will be watching this. I'm always surprised at the number of people who watch this on the city channel or later on however they do it. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. So it's been a very interesting and I thought informative and I think a very collegial atmosphere here. And I want to thank everybody for their attention and for their contributions. They're very important. In response to what was said by public testimony here, I think it's important that we hear from Mr. Vogel. I think that those issues need answering. With respect to Prince George Street, it is true that it is not part of what we're discussing tonight, but it is clear that it will be part of what's going to be discussed in the future. And whatever contribution anybody can make to that on February 1st, I'd certainly like to hear it, even if it's just speculation in the atmosphere about what might happen there. In any case, if there's anything...
I have one comment, just since we are holding the public hearing open. One stakeholder voice that's been sort of conspicuously absent to me is representative of the boat show to testify at some point. Because I think it's really important for us to hear, because the boat show is obviously such a large stakeholder and they are such a valuable part of what happens in this town that I want to really make sure that. You don't have to get up now, Mary, but since we're holding it open, you can think about it. But I would really like to hear more about, like if you, hopefully you're in favor, but it would be nice to hear it.
I'm Mary Ewenson. I live at 139 Pinecrest Drive in Annapolis, president of the Annapolis Boat Shows. And we have been working very closely with the design team on all of this, giving input, listening, watching a lot of it. We're really excited about the project. We're very worried about lots of parts of it and have been having our concerns addressed. There's, as everybody here said, there are still a lot of things up in the air. The great way to describe it, I think, was the edges. That's what we're all looking at. And as they mentioned, some accommodations have been made to fit standard size tents so that events like ours and other events can happen at City Dock. So we're really pleased with that. We're looking at all the designs and watching them closely and listening to the input. We'd be happy to comment further. It really is going to be as the last details fall in that we start to either go, everything's great, or oh my goodness. So I wanted to hear all of the input here, and I think it was really helpful. And it has been a very collaborative process, but hosting boat shows works best on level asphalt, which is not at all what we want. So watching all of the changes and elevation and the flooding has been a terrible problem for the boat shows. and knowing how we impact the city. When you talk about delivery trucks, once we put a boat show up in front of all of those buildings, that becomes harder. We know that we bring a lot to the city, but we also create a lot of problems. So we're trying very hard to be part of the solution. And I'm easy to find. I'm Mary at AnnapolisBoatShows.com. And if you have any questions or comments, or call the office, they'll give you my cell phone. And I'm happy to take calls and to weigh in, because we're happy to help. And our electrical contractor is one of my business partners, and he is standing by and to help with sort of all this stuff, because it's complicated. But we're excited about it and a little worried, just as I think everybody in the room is. But thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I appreciate it.
That's it. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening.
Actually, before you do that, so just two other quick things.
Okay.
Because I know Kimberly may be chomping at the bit to get our minutes out from last time. Can we?
Oh, that's true.
Approve the minutes?
Only 3 of the members who are present here now.
I think if we have a
I think we
majority of the
we can hold
quorum,
those over till next time.
three is good.
If we can hold those over till next time when Ms. Butler's here.
Do we have to? I mean,
there's minutes.
Okay.
Anything else?
So no, just the other thing under communications is, some people may know, some people may not, but if you went to the hearing at the Circuit Court on Providence Point, the judge said he was going to give his verbal opinion and wanted us to make sure that everybody knew when that was going to happen. And so that's been scheduled, as I understand it, for Friday, January 26th, 9 o'clock at Circuit Court.
At 9 o'clock?
I believe is what I was told. But check, it's going to be on the 26th, so check the Circuit Court docket, daily docket, and you can get the room and the time. But I just wanted to say that publicly, because I know that the judge really wanted to make sure that anybody who's interested in this knows when it is, because he's going to issue his verbal opinion from the bench.
Well, if you wanted to get news, this was the place to come tonight. The public hearing is held open. There may be other people who want to come and testify on February 1st. I don't know that this entire team needs to show up. You have some idea of what the questions are going to be and what needs to be answered. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn until February 1st.
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes. Thank you.